site. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Okay, I declare us adjourned.
Thank you. Morena koutou, welcome to the July Strategy and Policy Committee for 2022, our second to last committee meeting. Before we kick off, I'll open us with a karakia. Kino i tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa panamu i te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou e tātou katoa. Hui e, tai ki e.
Tai ki e.
Kia ora. So before we move into a few announcements, we'll just take any apologies or declarations of interest. So I had a couple of tentative apologies, but both of those people are with us. So I don't have any on the table. Does anybody have any apologies they'd like to pop on the table today? No? Fantastic. No apologies, and we don't have any declarations of interest that anybody would like to declare? Kapai, thank you. So welcome to our committee meeting this morning, and more importantly, welcome to our two new committee members, Sam Napier and Raniera Kyle. It's fantastic to have you both here to strengthen our governance and
He is frozen.
Whoops, sounds like Rachel's cut out for the moment.
oh, where?
Oh, there she is.
A sign
We're
of the
back.
day to come, hey? A sign of the day to come. I might just carry on with my announcement and then I'll change over to my other connection. So welcome, Sam and Raniera. I look forward to having you on our committee today. I said to you earlier that we learn by doing here, so we've got a nice light agenda today. And just to let the other committee members know that we'll be taking things slowly and smoothly where we can with our standing orders. Just a couple of reminders, if possible, please use a headset if you need to with your audio, and a reminder that we're being live streamed via our YouTube channel today. I know that we had got back out of the space of meeting virtually, which was really nice, but with the weather and winter colds and things, I'm quite comfortable that we're meeting virtually today. After all, we are an agile and progressive council, and we learn by doing again. So we'll move straight into our agenda today. Item 4.1, confirmation of previous minutes. The recommendation in front of us today is that the Strategy and Policy Committee agrees that the minutes of the meeting held 14th of June 2022 be confirmed as a true and correct record. Do I have a mover for that, please?
Happy to move, Councillor Stratford.
Thank you, Councillor Stratford. And a seconder? I'm happy to second those. So those are on the table. Do we have any comments or questions on those minutes, please? No? Nice and easy this morning, hey? Ka pai. So we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Sorry, we need to vote by division, don't we? I'm in favour. Councillor Clendon.
In favour.
Mayor Carter.
Yeah, in favour.
Deputy Mayor Court.
In favour.
Councillor Collard.
Yeah, in favour.
Councillor Foy.
Is muted.
Councillor Foy. Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Tippania. Councillor Foy has given us a thumbs up, so I'm going to assume that's in favour.
Aye.
Councillor Usich. Member Ward. Member Napier.
Aye.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
Kia ora. So I'm not sure if Councillor Vusic and Member Ward are with us at the moment, Dolly, so we might just leave them as an abstention and move on to item 5.1. So item 5.1, accessibility policy recommendation for making a new policy. So before I will move and second the recommendation, and then Darren, I'll hand the floor over to you for any opening comments. So the recommendation in front of us is that the Strategy and Policy Committee recommends that Council A make the Accessibility Policy 2022 for the Whānaus District Council, and B, revoke the Equity and Access for People with Disabilities Policy 2016. Do I have a mover for that, please?
Move, Member Napier.
Kia ora. Seconder, please.
Seconder, Deputy
Councillor
Mayor.
Ngā mihi, thank you. Darren, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Madam Chair. By way of introduction, this paper came to Council earlier this year, and we were asked to continue with amendment. Having looked at the disability policy, we felt that it was appropriate to make a number of changes, including what you will see is now the accessibility policy, which is what I'm going to say is broader than perhaps what the previous or current policy looked like. So really pleased with the direction of travel as to what the team is looking at broadening the scope of this policy and looking at how we operationalise it into our strategic thinking. So lucky enough to have Zach with us today, the report writer. So I'll pass to Zach just for any specific comment.
Thank you, Darren. Just to follow on from Darren, so initially the scope for this was to review, to continue with the equity and access policy for people with disabilities with amendment. However, when looking at that policy, a few things sort of stood out. One of which was that the previous policy was limited by design, so it was very disability centric as opposed to wider access needs considerations. And it had a high use of these overarching statements, which were hard to action or did not result in meaningful change. So as a result, and through the process of developing this new policy, we've identified a policy with clear language that has actionable policy statements designed to influence the work of council, promote meaningful interactions with those of the access needs community, and it covers a broad scope of council business. And further, we've connected it to, and aligned it to other strategies, national strategies and plans in the access needs space. Through development, I sat with the Disability Action Group, and they were pleased with some of the changes that have shown in this policy development, in particular clarity around the section of with DAG Group and how that interaction with council will carry on going forward. So I'll leave it there for initial comments and hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora, Zach. Members, I'll open the floor to questions of Zach first before we move into debate. So if raising virtual hands for Pātai, Councillor Collard.
Yeah, good morning, Zach. Thank you very much for that. In my reading of the policy, I don't seem. I would like to think that we are able to increase our scope to include the policing of parking for disabled people in shopping mall type arenas. Is there any scope for that type of thing for us to look after that so that we can keep those critical parking spaces clear for the people that need them?
Thank you for the question. I think operationally, a lot of the stuff will fall out of how this is implemented and the implementation plan that follows on if this is successfully adopted. I will actually just highlight at this point as well that there is a regional accessibility strategy Workstream, which is also underway. It's slightly separate and out of scope for this document, but it is a place as well that will be able to raise these really important things and really important actions that we can take as council to give effect to the policy.
Councillor Collard, you happy with that response?
Thank you. At this point in time, yeah, it's the best we've had so far.
Kia ora. Member Napia.
Excuse me, I'm getting used to virtual meetings. Kia ora, Zach. It was noted that the previous policy has not been implemented as intended. And my question is, was resourcing a factor? Resourcing, the type of which, for example, has financial implications. And by way of example, with regard to this new proposed policy, the communications policy statement foreshadows or contemplates upgrades in communication collateral or mechanisms. And presumably that will come with financial implications. So my question again, was one of the reasons for the unsuccessful implementation of the current policy resourcing? And if yes, have we covered off the any resourcing implications and financial implications for the successful implementation of this proposed policy?
Thank you for the question. I think the biggest challenge with the previous policy was the unwieldy scope of that policy. So it was a large scope, large overarching statements, and it wasn't manageable for council to implement that. With regards to funding, this policy itself doesn't commit to funding. It does commit to an environment and discussions to take place, and through the implementation plan, development of long-term plans, development of any strategies and plans from council, access needs will be considered in those conversations, and that will include funding. But I don't know if Roger or someone else wants to jump in and comment on that.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Roger Akers, Manager of Strategy Development. Just to answer your question, I think what's happened here is Zach has come on board and has picked up this policy, and it's really a policy that was in play for a long time, and he's actually drawn the scope in and put a good sort of a framework around it. So in reading through the policy proposal he's put forward, I think it's getting into a good place. But I just want to echo again what Zach said. This is just the policy. The actual commitment from the council will be via applying that policy through an implementation plan, which should bring into play budget applied to that policy. And the example would be if we're talking about ramps and that into buildings, etc., or training up of staff, then that needs to be considered as part of the implementation. I'm done. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yep.
Member Napia, are you satisfied with that response, or do you have further part-time?
I just have one more, if I may, Madam Chair. The implementation plan, Roger, is that to come before this committee, or will that go to the council when this recommendation, if it's passed, goes to the council? I'm just keen to ensure that the council has before it information such as will be in the implementation plan, which might require the council to actively commit resourcing to ensure the successful implementation of this policy.
Yeah, it's a good question. So for us in our role, we do the policy and we develop the implementation plan, and it does come back through this committee for approval when the final policy is approved. So Bryce just messaged me saying it's operational. So for us, it's how the council operational part of the organisation takes that policy and one budgets for it in the long-term plan and annual plan processes. And then taking that budget allocation and actually doing the mahi to make that happen. So,
thank you, Madam Chair. I have no more questions.
Kapai, thank you. Councillor Tipinia.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair Smith. Hey, do we still have a fax number? Because the old policy talks about how we'll make sure that we are accessible by ensuring all people know what our fax number is. That just might be showing how dated it actually was, or how old it actually was, because I haven't ever used a fax machine, but I know that they exist, but I don't know if they still exist. Sorry, that's not my question. My question is just the wording in this. I know that we had a unsuccessful attempt at becoming a unitary authority, and Northern Transportation Alliance fell out of that actually. But within this, it refers to us as being the far north region. Is that wording okay? Are we trying to rally ourselves up to be greater, or? That was my only question, the only thing I picked up on.
Zach, do you want to talk to that?
Does it matter? In Te Reo Māori, it doesn't matter. We use the same word for everything.
Yeah.
No, I draw
English,
no other. Sorry, I draw no other conclusions from using that wording, and nor am I lobbying for any change to anything or anything. So,
it's an error, and we can make the change. We are the Far North District Council, so.
Happy, Councillor Tipinia? Kapai, Councillor Foy.
Ata Maria koutou, Felicity Foy tēnei, kei te mau iwi au I tēnei da aroha mai. Sorry, I'm a bit croaky. So you've probably avoided spending some time with me, which is good. Just in terms of the current policy, what I'm more interested in is the next document, and Roger has alluded to that, in that it's operational. My view is that does need to come back to council. Two examples that will ensure that it can be implemented or not are, the urban design protocols in terms of designing our open spaces and how that integrates with the open spaces strategy. Secondly, as well, the engineering standards and the implementation of those, both in private subdivisions and also through the NTA within our open spaces. Both of those mean better outcomes for our people, and both of those will not be implemented, and these will just be words in another strategy unless we put putia towards it, put funding towards it, and also ensure that the other strategies throughout the silo of council align. Zach, do you want to comment on how you're working with the other departments of council, particularly the NTA, the new district plan engineering standards, and urban design in terms of our open spaces through our asset managers for the reserves department? Thank you. Ngā mihi.
thank you. So just to get to this point, conversations have taken place across council with various other business units, which has got the commitments that we've put into this policy. Going forward, and how those are translated into actual delivery actions or tasks will be through that implementation plan. And again, nothing is predetermined in that space. So all of these discussions will take place and will go forward in order to get to that point that we have an implementation plan to then roll out across council.
Kia ora, Zach. Councillor Foy, does that satisfy your question?
I don't think it does, no, particularly because the new district plan is now proposed, including the new engineering standards, and the NTA Alliance document needs to reflect all of these aspects. And you don't need to answer this question now. Zach, I understand you're not an engineer, it's a different department. But my concern is that our departments aren't working together. And if we're going to put forward a policy, it needs to be holistic to reflect the outcomes, not just your department and putting words on a piece of paper. Ngā mihi, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Foy. I have no more, sorry, Deputy Mayor Court has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if my camera will pick this up, but for Moko Hania's benefit, fax machine. Just thought I'd show that to you. I know in the policy at F1F under policies, consult with people with disabilities in the early planning and design stages of major council facility developments and redevelopments. My question is, and I don't know that it's for you, Zach, particularly, although we did talk about this at the Disability Action Group meeting, is there any reason that that could not be implemented effective immediately ahead of an implementation plan? The engineering standards and guidelines that my colleague spoke about in the urban design protocols, if we wait till we capture these things in our policy instruments, we're missing an opportunity. So I would like some feedback from staff whether or not we could implement that immediately, and I think that would give me some governance comfort. And my second question is under number 1, where it says council will endeavour to ensure. Is that, going to channel my inner Stephen Joyce, is that strictly legal? I think it should be council will, not council will endeavour to. So I just wanted some clarity on those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a point, I think those are referencing the previous policy, the equity and access for people with disabilities that we're moving to revoke. So the one previous has got some updated statements that'll provide some clarity in those areas. To your point though about consultation, I think, or the intention with this new policy is to ensure that there's tighter relationship between the DAG group and council. Through using the mechanisms that we have in place. So I would like to think that as a result of this policy, something that can take place almost immediately will be better communication between council and the DAG group.
Through the chair, I've just got some further clarification just on a few bits and pieces in here. And I'm going back a little bit, is one of the things around the policy development processes that we are continually improving. Internal stakeholders inside the council, so subject matter experts, are involved in the development of this policy. So we've got the people who would be actually taking that policy and implementing it involved up front. So they've been involved through that process. One thing that we and I'll shamelessly take a bit of a push for this one, is the monitoring of our policies as well. It should be part of that implementation, ensure that monitoring that they're effectively delivering on the policy outcomes that are in those policies. We need to look carefully at that and make sure we've got that in place as part of the implementation. So us as a policy team have been pushing for that that approach, and for that to be reported back through the regulatory committee. The engagement team is working on the engineering standards, and I believe that they're looking to bring in some of these things we're proposing through the accessibility policy. Zach, you might be aware of that. I know what's going on with that, but that's what I'm being made aware of this morning.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, but my question wasn't fully answered, even though I was reading the wrong policy, and I do apologise for that. Yeah. My question was in regard to consulting with people with disabilities, which might not be repeated verbatim in the accessibility policy. If I turn the clock back a few years, council brought barrier free to the far north, and we sat down with barrier free and did a workshop in chambers, And then they put us all in wheelchairs and sent us out to loose on the streets of Kaikoui to see if we could actually navigate our way around Kaikoui. And they gave us special glasses to wear, which mimicked what it was like to be sight impaired. And they gave us headphones, so it mimicked what it was like to be hearing impaired. And what we learnt was that with the best will in the world, what we were doing was not meeting the needs of the disabled communities. So I'm thinking governance comfort, I think, that we're not just going to rely on engineering standards and guidelines and urban design protocols and all of those other things if they just don't work. So what I'm wanting to know is if there's any reason why we couldn't immediately, with every capital work that we do, consult with people with disabilities so that we get this right. And I'll give you an example. The New Zealand Building Code, which is referred to in the legislation, doesn't set handrails at an accessible height in public toilets, nor does it set hand basins in a public toilet that is accessible by people in wheelchairs. So I just want some governance comfort that in the interim, while we're working on an implementation plan, that we can start immediately to engage with the DAG group and get this right. Thank you.
Zach, Roger, did you have anything to add? Otherwise, I note that Dr. Myberg's hand is up. Dr. Myberg.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. I note the comments from the Deputy Mayor with regards to some provisions that certainly do need further consultation and checking. But within the Building Act 2004, we see several checks and balances in relation to particularly new buildings in terms of design and specifically looking at it from a disability perspective. So the Act is focused on that, perhaps not broadly enough, but there is certainly quite a lot within the Building Act which is looked at from a disability and accessibility perspective. We can do more, obviously, but just purely buildings, there are checks and balances there to address some of the concerns that have been expressed.
Thank you, Dr. Myberg. Deputy Mayor Court, are you happy for me to move on at this point? I'm not sure that you've got comfort or not, but.
Not at this point, I haven't got comfort, but I'm happy for you to move on, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I don't have any further hands, so I just had one partai. Zach, I raised it earlier in the development of this policy as well. For me, I would have loved to have seen this accessibility policy go further into the inclusion space and specifically into the rainbow communities and enabling and allowing for planning for access for our minority groups of our communities. So my question, and I'm not seeking an amendment to the policy today, but my partai is really, what is the process working with the accessibility strategy, the region-wide accessibility strategy, to look to capture that in the next reiteration of this policy and as quickly as possible. I'll give an example of why I'm seeking for that is I noticed that our new portable public toilets that we install are all unisex. They are accessible to anybody regardless of their gender, and for me I'd like to see that captured in a policy so that when we're implementing our capital works program we're thinking along those lines and ensuring that we're creating safe accessible spaces for all of our community. So my question is, how do I make that happen? Kia ora.
I think the regional accessibility strategy is the most appropriate place for a lot of that to take place, and that is going to be heavily consulted on widely across the whole region, so whangārei, kaipara and quite broad. And that'll be the opportunity where people with access needs and across all of the need sort of groups that they self-identify and provide to us will provide us the insight that we need to go ahead and listen to what the best results and best approaches are that meet their needs. And that'll be where we get those sort of rich insights into developing something going forward.
Kia ora, Zach. Thank you. That's helpful. I'll keep an eye out for how we can get more involvement with that strategy as a committee. I noticed Member Ward has popped her hand up. I think she's been able to join us after her power cut in Haruru. Member Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following on from the query that I submitted, sorry, I'm having trouble getting my camera up. Things just are not good here today. There I am. Thank you. Just querying around, I was looking for, within the policy, I was actually looking for, I guess, hidden disability, like learning disability and assistance in that field. And I did pose a question, which, thank you, Darren, was actually, and Roger, was actually, I did receive an answer as to what would happen with this policy. I'm concerned about the timeframe of implementation, and I haven't actually had a response to that. I guess from experience, what I would like to see is more support provided, particularly around elected members and staff in relation to disabilities that are not necessarily obviously physical disabilities, but learning disabilities, and the disadvantage for those standing for their communities, and also within staff who perhaps may require help and don't like to put their hand up, or don't want to ask for assistance, or don't want to admit that they actually have a disability. So I'm just wondering what the time frame is on that delivery of implementation, because we're heading into an election, and I think it's really important that people feel confident that they're going to have the support and the training in relation to any disabilities they may have, and also in relation to using devices. And we have heard the word dinosaur a lot over the last, well, I have in the last 2.5 years, and I don't want to see any barriers put in the way of people who are keen community doers and leaders, and likewise with staff. So just really, Madam Chair, wanting some sort of time frame and commitment as to how that's going to be addressed in the policy under the communication side of things, and to put something out there for elected members. Thank you.
The implementation's the immediate next step once this has gone through this process here. I can't bookend how long that will take. I imagine some of this will be a quick process. I think communications will probably be one of those quick processes. I would envisage that 6 months is the reasonable time frame to provide something in a, in a completed form, be it potentially needing further work, but absolutely 6 months to come back and to provide an update in that space and some idea of what that will be like.
Thank you, Belinda. The resident dinosaur thanks you.
Oh, you're there, Dave. You're not the only dinosaur, believe you me. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you, Member Ward. So that brings us to the end of our questions. We've got a recommendation in front of us that has been moved by Member Napier and seconded by Deputy Mayor Court. So we're just going to move into debate at this point. Member Napier, as the mover, you get first right of any comments that you would like to make for or against this policy, and then I'll move on to Deputy Mayor Court. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as we move into debating, can I just share with the other members of the committee that I am keen to ensure that the implementation policy is well put together, and that it does reflect what I sense will be a need for financial commitment on behalf of the council to successfully implement the policy. I also have taken on board the comments made by other committee members and thank them for that, but I have no further comments, Madam Chair, from my part. Thank you.
Kia ora. Deputy Mayor Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just reiterate my concerns regarding the engineering standards and guidelines. Draw elected members' attention to the fact that the JBC in Kerikeri is not disability accessible in a power cut. Nobody can actually get in the front door unless they're fully abled. So we do need to roll out this policy to a whole new way of thinking around how we do business in council and consider the needs of all of our communities. That's all I have to say at this point. But actually, I just wish to thank Zach. He did come along. We had a really good debate at the Disability Action Group meeting, and he gave me a lot of comfort that he really grasped this. So thank you, Zach.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court. Councillor Stratford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you everybody for your questions on this. It's really comforting to see so much interest in this policy. And I've been involved with the Disability Action Group since the previous triennium, and they've had a few attempts at this policy getting to this stage, because we have had a change in staff. At the last Disability Action Group meeting, the one before, we did discuss whether we just wanted to remove this policy and wait for the regional accessibility strategy to come in. But as you know, you just, timelines and people can shift. So we wanted to make sure that we embedded some form of policy, even though the previous policy, we saw shortfalls. We, just like what Matua Sam has said, there's no comfort that things will be implemented. There are examples that Anne has raised of the policy not being implemented. There are our shortcomings in delivery of footpaths. There's shortcomings of deliveries of toilets and people not being able to fit into bathroom spaces over the last few years. Things happen. Things have happened. There's been lots of learnings though for our district facilities and footpath staff. And where we're at now though is there's more strength in the words of this policy than there has been previously. The Disability Action Group meeting is well represented and they're fully engaged in the regional accessibility strategy. Thank you, Zach, for keeping the committee in the loop. The Disability Action Group recently produced a draft newsletter, and as the Deputy Mayor knows, there wasn't many positives in there about what the Disability Action Group has been able to achieve on behalf of its community in our district. There are some good things, but it's hard to remember the good things. So this policy is needed. I fully support us, having the updated version, but we have a long way to go before we are addressing the shortcomings for not only people with disabilities, but people that need that extra help, especially with language barriers to communicate in our world. Yeah, so that's me. Oh, hang on, I can't go past the engineering standards. Councillor Foy, the Disability Action Group have had a lot of input into the engineering standards. They're not, so we don't talk about stormwater at our Disability Action Group, but we talk about the impacts of them, so a crossfall of a footpath is more important to them than where the water goes. So I get that you feel there are silos, but we have had district plan team there, we've had engineers, we've had roading team and district facilities, and Zach in the room when we have these discussions about engineering standards. So, but there is conflict between what happens with stormwater, of course, and the needs of our disability community to be able to get around our footpaths and our roads. Conflicts with how we address the flow of a stormwater path. Sorry, Madam Chair, just needed to. I don't know if everybody gets that too. So the smoothness, curbs for people in a mobility. Not just a scooter, Deputy Mayor, on a mobility scooter or what do you call those things that you push around when you're when we're older? That's what we'll be walking on, walkers and mobility scooters. They across the footpaths in our district make people that use those. We're making their lives a living misery because our footpaths and curbs are not even surfaces. So the policy doesn't do anything to address that, but our engineering standards do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Stratford. I've got Councillor Vucic, and then I'm aware that Councillor Foy has raised an amendment in the chat. So I'll take Councillor Vucic, and then I will ask for Member Foy to table her amendment.
Thank you.
You're on mute, Councillor Vucic.
Am I back now?
You're good.
Good. This machine is responding very slowly. So really, look, I agree with what Sam has said, that where's the money going to come from? Are we going to look at this? You know, are we serious about our policies? It is a difficult area, as Councillor Courts pointed out. We actually have the community boards looking at footpaths and where the priorities are going to go. So I think and also we hear about from, you know, Councillor Stratford, the standards we have in terms of engineering. It's to solve it instantly will be difficult. I think having a policy in place is crucial, and I think having a plan in place to say this is how we're going to progress this is also very important. Otherwise, it just becomes words. As a person who's got a disability myself, I realise how important it is. In fact, until I was using crutches, I didn't realise how dangerous our entrance even to the council building here in Kaikaei is. And I fell out of a wheelchair as well, thinking a little lip would be fine. It wasn't, you know. So I had to learn the hard way. So look, as Kelly would know, and going to the disability action, good on you, Councillor Stratford. It is an area that we've got to address. So I support this as a policy. I'm happy with that, and that's really my main comments. But again, the key thing is let's put some serious planning behind it and money behind it, so that we can actually achieve this in a manner that's affordable. That will be a challenge, but we can do it.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Vucic. Councillor Foy, I'll ask you to table your amendment, and then I'll call for a seconder, and then I'll ask for Darren to comment from a technical point of view on that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair Namahi. I put my amendment in the chat. It's just reflective of my narrative around this, and it does reflect as well Sam's comments about the implementation plan, and we need to not just have words, we need to have the funding, the instruments in terms of implementing it, and governance need to own that, and leaving it at an operation level I don't think in this instance is appropriate, but I'd like to hear the staff's comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor Foy. So you've moved an amendment. It's not on the screen at the moment, but I understand that amendment is that the implementation plan for this policy be brought back to this committee. So it should read to the Strategy and Policy Committee for approval of the committee. Do I have a seconder for that amendment, please?
Happy to second your madam. Your madam.
I'll take it, Councillor Stratford. Namahi, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Stratford. Darren, if you've got any comments you'd like to make to this amendment before I open the floor, thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good discussion. I'd suggest that the governance is around the policy. Operationally, implementation plans should sit in the operational realm. If there is a level of comfort that is needed, that could be through, can I suggest, more robust reporting to the regulatory committee in relation to monitoring, not just specific to this policy, but to a number of policies that could have interest. I mean, if you're wanting us to report back on every implementation plan, that could be a lengthy process. And do we want reports for the sake of reports? Again, looking at how do we fund these implementation plans, that really is what is at the core. Those debates could be had around the annual plan and the long-term plan process. And for my mind, that would be the focus of governance.
Kia ora, Darren. So we've got an amendment on the table, mindful that Deputy Mayor Court's hand is up, but understanding what is, I'll pass the floor to Councillor Foy first, and then to Councillor Stratford as a seconder, and then to Councillor Court.
Thank Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Darren, for your commentary around the amendment. However, my view is different to the matters raised in that respect, that there's no point in having any policies whatsoever unless there is implementation of those appropriately and resourced appropriately and across the different regulatory functions that Council has. The regulatory department don't specifically have a lot of resourcing in terms of not only the district plan monitoring, let alone any policy monitoring, which is why at a resourcing level, it's important for governance to know if there is further resourcing needed to that effect, and also how it's being implemented in terms of the private sector. One example is that just turning the picnic tables on the side and the positioning of the new footpaths and making them wider and at a certain gradient, that's implemented by the asset manager in the reserves department. It's not actually implemented by the private sector. And as an organisation, we are big movers and shakers to actually see results for our people. And that comes down to procurement as well, and what's in those documents. So I personally think that the implementation plans are the most important and should come back to elected members. Thank you.
Councillor Stratford.
Tautoko, Councillor Foy. We often say governance owns strategy. Governance also owns the budget, and for implementation to be effective, that implementation is going to require budget if it's not already there. And I talked about shortfalls earlier. I don't think it's already there. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Stratford. Deputy Mayor Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do notice on the bottom of page 4 of 4, and I've got the hard copy of the agenda, so it might not necessarily be the same for the electronic agenda, under the section monitoring and implementation, where it says Council will monitor the implementation of the policy. An implementation plan for the accessibility policy will outline key activities to implement the policy. But when I read the actual policy itself, it's already captured in there. So we talk about ensuring that our plans align to this policy, ensuring signage, ensuring retrofits, incorporating these in our design principles. So I'm now sitting here listening to the debate, wondering what the implementation plan will actually deliver us. So every new capital work moving forward must by law incorporate disability accessible mode. Every retrofit will require disability accessible mode. The engineering standards and guidelines must include disability accessibility in mode. All new signage. So I'm wondering, and I'm just seeking clarity because I'm obviously missing a step here. If I could get some feedback from staff, it's exactly what the implementation plan will address that shouldn't automatically be captured in our renewals and capital works. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court. I've got Councillor Clendon.
Madam Chair, can I have an answer?
Apologies, Zach.
Yes, thank you. So the policy itself and the statements that you've identified through the policy, some of those sit at quite a high level. So what will come through at an implementation plan level will be individual actions that can contribute to those higher level actions, and this sort of a further level of detail if there is any clarity further required about how we're going to implement some of these steps.
Sorry, Madam Chair, to belabor the point. Can you give me an example, Zach, of something that won't automatically be captured?
Not off the top of my head, without sort of being presumptuous about what the implementation plan may actually say, but there is things in there. Ensuring public consultation is accessible, for example. How is that accessible will be something that is developed through the implementation plan.
Happy Deputy Mayor Court? Ka pai, thank you. Councillor Clendon.
Yeah, thank you. I think my sort of concerns or response to the amendment are similar to Anne's. I'm not sure that there will be a single plan. I can't imagine what an implementation plan, perhaps in the way the amendment imagines, would look like. To me, the implementation will start with low cost, no cost things. You know, think about the arrangement of the furniture in some of our buildings. Think about the quick, easy wins we can get. Simply to have people thinking in terms of, yeah, is this the most accessible we can make it without spending a lot of money? If we start imagining a plan that's going to outline all of the capital works and renewals and so on, that's going to look like a lot like the annual plan, if not the LTP. I recall the earlier version of this policy, I raised concerns, but I thought it did commit us to going out and spending big chunks of money sort of immediately to do things like upgrade our footpaths and some of our public infrastructure, which would be a wonderful thing, but we simply don't have that money on hand or going spare. So yeah, I think this notion of a plan to me would be more of a prioritization. What can we do immediately at low cost or no cost? What are the big bites we can take out of it? Things like improving the quality of our public loos and our footpaths and indeed our council facilities. Yeah, I'm struggling with the idea that there'll be one master plan that we'll all follow. So I can't really imagine then how this committee would seek to give approval to that. As Anne has pointed out, the policy does state that council will monitor the implementation of the policy and that a plan will outline key activities to implement it. Yeah, I'm just struggling to imagine how anything would come to this committee for approval in that sort of a context. So I'm pretty ambivalent about it, I guess. Oops.
Thank you, Councillor Clendon. I've got Member Ward, but before I take Member Ward, Roger, I noticed that your hand is up. Did you need to give a response to Councillor Clendon? You're on mute, Roger.
Busted. There you go. I just want to give some answers to some of these questions around the implementation. This is a strategic policy, for lack of a better term. So it's wide-reaching across the council, and there's many aspects that need to be considered with this policy when it comes into play. Obviously, also informed by the regional accessibility strategy. So to jump to the implementation discussions on the specifics is a hard thing to do at this point in time. We need to go through that policy development process. But I want to come back to an implementation plan, so to speak. We need to develop up what that would look like, but I would anticipate that implementation plan would signal how we bring these items into our long-term plan and annual plan processes, because that's where it gives effect to via budget allocation. So, but we need to go through this policy development process to get to that point. So you're right, it probably wouldn't be an individual line by line item saying we're going to widen the footpaths, we're going to put rails in, etc. But what it would signal is that it would signal a review of engineering standards, for example. It would signal a review of capital works programs. It would signal a review of other strategies and policies that are in play around the council. So I'm not saying that's what it would be, but I would say that when we get to that point there, it will require that wider review of much of what's going on around the council. This is a hard policy because of these things, because it is at that level. But we need to go through this policy development process to get to that point.
Thank you, Roger. That's helpful. Member Ward.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just from a community board perspective, looking at implementation, I think a good easy place to start would be at community board level, with communities actually identifying the signage and markings on the ground that are non-compliant with the bylaws and the policy, so that everything what we've got currently is not speaking to each other. And in order to actually monitor and enforce those bylaws, we actually need to get the basic implementation right in the first instance. You know, there's a lot of abuse of disability parking and the signage is wrong and it doesn't necessarily match the bylaw. Community boards have a big part to play in this. Councillor Stratford, I know we have done some work in the past and it's fallen into a black hole, you know, and we're still running around trying to get the basics done. So I guess I'm just asking, can we start there? And we could start straight away. Thank you.
Kia ora, Member Ward. At this point, I don't have any hands up, but I'm just going to have a quick kōrero. So unfortunately, I can't support this amendment as it stands. I absolutely hear where the concern is in terms of that implementation. However, I don't agree with it being a governance role to approve the implementation plan. I think it's a governance role to monitor the effectiveness of whether or not we're enabled to implement that. And we've had this conversation around our other policies and bylaws in the past. Not efficiently reviewing those, not monitoring those got us into the place that we got to as a council with our bylaws to begin with. So I would absolutely support that a monitoring report was to go to regulatory as part of a regular work program. However, I'm not comfortable that the committee would be looking to approve an implementation plan, as I would imagine that would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long if I'm understanding the devil of the detail that elected members are seeking. So I won't be supporting this amendment today. However, I understand where it's coming from. So that brings us to the end. Councillor Foy, would you like right of reply?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And sorry, just with regard to your comment there, and I support the matters raised by Member Ward and Councillor Clinton, that no, we're not looking for hundreds of pages. We just need the asset manager for reserves to tell us how they're going to approach it without spending any extra money. How so that's actually utilising existing money with no additional resourcing. How in the NTA they would implement this without any additional resourcing. With retrospect and renewals, how we would implement this with no additional resourcing. It would be 2 or 3 pages. I think sometimes our council gets too much into the detail instead of actually what's practical and what can be implemented straight away without overthinking things. So that's the intent of how I would see an implementation plan. I don't need to show staff what that would look like. I'm sure they can simplify things in their head. And that's what I'm looking for in terms of this amendment. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Foy. So we have an amendment on the table that we will put to the vote now. Marlema, could we have that amendment on the screen, please? Thank you. So the amendment is that C, that the implementation plan for this policy be brought, can we just change that to brought back to the Strategy and Policy Committee for approval of the committee, moved by Councillor Foy, seconded by Councillor Stratford. And Marlema, when you're ready, we'll pop it to the vote. Thank you. Councillor Clendon.
Oppose.
Mayor Carter.
In favour.
Deputy Mayor Court.
Abstain.
Councillor Collard.
Support.
Councillor Foy.
Support.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Tepania.
Support.
Councillor Busich.
I will abstain. I think I'll just abstain. Maybe I should have made comments before.
Member Ward.
Support.
Member Napier.
Support.
Member Kyle.
Support.
And I'm against on that one. So that with squinting eyes has been carried. So that becomes part of the substantive motion. So we have that back on the table. We didn't complete our debate on that one. So do I have any further speakers for this resolution in front of us, please? No? Fantastic. So at this point, we'll put the substantive motion to the vote now. Dolly, if we could just have that up on the screen, that would be great, please. Thank you. So the resolution in front of us is that the strategy and policy recommends that Council A make the accessibility policy 2022 for the Far North District Council, B revoke the equity and access for people with disabilities policy 2016, and C, I don't think we did a D, that the implementation plan for this policy be brought back to the Strategy and Policy Committee for approval of the committee. That was moved by Councillor Foy and seconded by Councillor Stratford. Initially moved by Member Napier and seconded by Deputy Mayor Court, and we'll put it to the vote at this point. So I am in favour. Councillor Clendon.
In favour, but I would just note that grammatically the C doesn't make sense. Perhaps that can be tidied up later, but I support the motion.
Thank you.
In favour.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Court.
In favour.
Councillor Collard.
In favour.
Councillor Foy.
Favour.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Tipanea.
In favour.
Councillor Vucic.
Yeah, aye.
Member Ward.
Support.
Member Napier.
Support.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
Kapai, that is carried. Thank you, everybody. That was a solid, robust debate on that item. Luckily, we've got a nice light agenda. So that brings us to item 5.2, the Easter Sunday shop trading policy. And there is a lengthy recommendation there in front of us that I'm happy not to read out. Would somebody like to move that? I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mayor Carter. Darren, I'll hand over to you in the first instance before moving to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is our second report for the day. So again, earlier this year, asked to develop the new policy, noting that we didn't hit the review milestone date and that this policy will revoke in 2024 if some work is not done on before that date. We've been out to consultation, a number of submissions received. 76% of those submissions were in favour of what the new policy is suggesting. So that shows a level of interest and a level of support from our community for what we are seeking to do with the new policy. Donald, the report writer, is with us this morning, so I'll pass to Donald for any of the intricacies that I may have overlooked. So Donald, welcome. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Good morning. Very little to add. It was gratifying that we went out to consultation in 2017 when we first made the policy, and there were 46 submitters, and this year 113. And I guess the tide had turned. In 2017, just under half, 48%, were in favour of the policy, but now it's 76%. And basically, under the Shop Trading Hours Act that this policy is made under, we are allowed to make a policy either for the whole district or for specific parts of the district. And there were no submissions that made any comments about the wording of the policy at all, and no one wanted to verbally submit. And so the gist of the feedback is strongly in favour. We did a final legal review, and our lovely lawyers spotted a few slight drafting changes, which have been included in the recommendations. But other than those, we're recommending that the policy goes to the full council to be made, and that the existing policy be revoked.
Kia ora, thank you for that, Donald. Do I have any questions? Member Napier, and then Councillor Stratford, and then Member Ward. Sam, you're just on mute. Oh, and again. This time.
What you haven't heard, Madam Chair, is that I have 3 times apologised for my clumsiness. And my apologies one more time.
Not at all, not at all.
I have 3 questions. One about the process that informed the drafting of the policy and the analysis of the submissions. One about the drafting change, and then one of a procedural nature, which I wish to address to you, Madam Chair. So if I start with the first one, for Darren and Donald, this policy seems to me to be about 2 things: commerce and Easter. I note on page 30 of the papers, as they appear in the electronic form, the second paragraph, which says, in addition, emails inviting input were sent to unions representing shop workers and to business associations in the district. And I get why you would do that. Absolutely, I do. That covers off only one of the 2 principal areas that this policy relates to, that being commerce. What of the Christian traditions and the associated with and the importance of Easter? So my question is, Donald and Darren, am I correct in inferring from that report or that sentence that no emails inviting input were sent to any Christian organisations, interfaith organisations or such in the district?
Donald, do we have a comment on that?
Yeah, I do. You're correct. We didn't send emails to the different churches in the district inviting their responses. We had a conversation with our engagement team on that issue. And firstly, when we Googled, there were 50 or so churches listed. We figured that the notification of the policy through social media channels and through public notices, it was published in all the local newspapers, could very readily reach church members who could let their minister or administrator, whatever the word is, know that this policy was available or was contemplated. So we figured, I guess, from a common sense perspective, that we didn't need to reach out in that way. A second point is, although we reached out to unions who have had a strong stance on that they've actually been against the policy around New Zealand. So we reached out to unions, which are sort of on one side, and then business associations, which have been on the other side. It ended up, I think we had one response from a business association, but we didn't, that targeted reaching out for input didn't result in a whole flood of submissions from special interest groups that might have biased things in the way of commerce, for example.
Thank you.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Donald. My next question is around some of the drafting change, and Donald and Darren, that appears on page 35 of the papers as they present, and I think page 3 of the proposed policy draft. The word shop, lowercase s, is replaced with the word shop, uppercase s, and it's said that brings it in line with the Trading Act definition. But as I read the Trading Act definition, the word shop, uppercase s, is not a thing in the Act. The word shop, lowercase s, is, and it's actually defined in, I think, section 2 of the Trading Act. So I'm a bit curious as to the legal advice around that. So to try and clarify the question again, shop with a lowercase s is actually the defined term in the Act, and yet we are proposing to redefine that term with an uppercase s, supposedly to be consistent with the Act. So I'm confused there, Donald. Can you help me out, please?
Yes, and I wish I was a lawyer in this situation, but we went to our legal team. The reason for the capitalisation is that the word shop is something that has a very specific meaning under the Act. So in the drafting of the actual policy, that word shop has that little capital to alert us to the fact that it's has a special meaning. In fact, just as an aside, the shops that are being talked about exclude things like chemists and dairies and petrol stations that are allowed to trade on Easter Sunday. It includes things like bookshops and the warehouse and other sort of general purpose shops. So anyway, it was a legal nicety from our legal team to capitalise that word.
Sorry, just to jump in there as well, Donald. So Sam,
Alex, you're the man.
Yes, so I'm one of the solicitors in the legal team who provided the advice. So the actual definition of shop in the policy, it's actually to do with how we defined it in the policy as shop with a capital S. It's just a standard doing definitions in bylaws and policies, that when you define something in the actual bylaw or policy with a capital, you just maintain that throughout it, so it's clear that that word links back to the definition in both the bylaw or the policy. So it's less to do with the direct act and more to do with the actual policy definitions.
Oh, well, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, that does answer the question. Then on page 36, it does say shop capital S has the same meaning as in section 2 of the Act. And shop capital with a capital S does have no meaning at all in that Act. So I'm going to let that go because this is kind of sounding like my OCD kicking in. But but it is curious to me because shop capital S has no definition whatsoever in the Shop Trading Hours Act.
You're right.
So just to clarify that, Sam, so in the Shop Trading Hours Act 1990, shop is defined in section 2, and it has a definition outlined in that section.
Yes, and when I read it last night, it is spelt with shop, lowercase s.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, I do understand that. So it's just because, so in the policy itself, we used the capital S as part of that definition. So even though it links, the definition in the policy links back to the Act, the actual definition in the policy is with a capital. So it's more so that when people read that policy, they link it back to the definition, and then that definition links back to the Act. It can be changed to a lower S if that is preferable, but it's more just sort of standard drafting rules.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to let that go, but can I say it would be more preferable because, in fact, shop capital S has no meaning whatsoever in the Shop Trading Hours Act, and we're purporting to say on page 36 that it has the same meaning as. So, but the answers, my question's been answered, Madam Chair. I'll let that go. I prefer for the S to be lowercase, but then may I move on to the to the procedural question, Madam Chair, and you'll appreciate, please, and forgive me because this is my first rodeo. At what point may I propose an amendment by putting that in the chat?
Great, Patai. So the way that I run my meetings is that we do question and answers, and then we move into the debate. So at the point that we move into the debate, you're welcome to put your amendment at that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. I have got Member Ward and then Councillor Stratford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Still having problems here. Interesting, this discussion around the Act, because my pre-meeting question to you, Madam Chair, was in relation to the number of references to the Shop Trading Hours Act 1990 without any reference to the actual Act. And I understand you may not want to put the full Act in here, but a link to the Act is something that I had requested, although I am capable of looking things up myself. This is a public document, and I feel there's quite a lot of, often we get reports that have references to acts and things, or a higher order document with no link or reference. So that was my first question, and thank you for taking that on board to explore that option. My second question is the silly question of the day. How do shops with a capital S or lower S and mobile shops fit into the actual overall trading policy when it sits on the side and seems to be a bit of a free-for-all in our communities for those that have mobile shop or hawkers licences that they trade under? Thank you.
I can respond, Madam Chair.
That'd be great.
Good question, Belinda. If I refer to the Act and the meaning of shop, it's all encompassing. So I'll just read what shop means. So it's a building, a place, or part of a building or place where goods are kept, sold, or offered for sale by retail, and includes an auction mart and a barrow, stall, or other subdivision of a market. So it's fairly broad in what it determines.
Thank you, Darren. So, Madam Chair, the mobile, this comes down to monitoring, I assume, because the mobile shops have been trading whenever, wherever. So this is going to come back down to, I guess, monitoring and implementation of the mobile licences, which is usually after hours, public holidays and weekends. I'm just raising that because the Sunday is a focus, and the Easter weekend, holiday weekends are an issue of this particular policy, and I do find some of these things a little bit confusing. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Ward. Councillor Stratford.
I think Donald needs to answer that, but I probably could too. But Donald, you go first.
Yeah, I think that's a slight red herring in terms of this particular policy. If we didn't make this policy, then shops would not be allowed to open, but we wouldn't monitor it. I believe it's Department of Internal Affairs or whatever. It's not within our remit to have inspectors checking shops opening on Easter Sunday, but I think that's moot, because if we do pass it, shops will be allowed to open, and there won't be any monitoring, because it's totally there, up to them whether or not they open. I mean, for instance, last Easter Sunday I was out at Waipapa and the warehouse was open, but Noel Leeming wasn't. We're not going to inspect Noel Leeming and say you got to open, because it's totally up to them.
And just further, Madam Chair, I'll jump in. And so my understanding around this policy is that it applies to mobile hawkers as well. The term shop is applied to mobile. So yeah, any regional policy, which is what we're what we're putting in play, carrying on, I should say, applies to mobile hawkers. So a little similar to what Belinda was raising about a link, because in my role as chair of the district licensing committee, I have seen one particular email from a person who refused not to trade, like they wanted to sell alcohol on Easter because they were confused over this regional strategy saying you can open, but the fact that you can't sell alcohol unless, of course, you're you have accommodation provisions. So yeah, I wanted to seek out having an extra sentence in there. I know you've got that part where it says notwithstanding legislative controls, blah, 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 Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act. And a good licensee should know that they can't sell alcohol on Good Friday and Easter Sunday. But when there's all this advertising going around saying you can trade on Easter, you know, we've got this policy, we have had it for ages and nobody knew they could trade anyway, there's going to be confusion. So I was hoping we could put a link or just have add the sentence saying there are restrictions around alcohol sales on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, if possible. Thank you.
Just to comment on that, the policy under the Act, it doesn't cover sales of liquor because they're covered on under separate liquor licensing rules. We could put an explanatory note in the policy to reiterate that, but I think actually there is a one-liner in there that it doesn't cover those, that doesn't cover liquor outlets. I'd have to have a quick look.
Donald, just for a point of clarification, I note that we're recommending to council. Is there any way that between here and council you could work on that and bring that into the report that comes to council to give Councillor Stratford that satisfaction at that point?
Yeah, definitely can, and we'll link through to Alex and the legal team to make sure that we have that absolutely correct.
Kapai, thank you. And Marlema, perhaps if we could just make that as a note as part of this following from this resolution to ensure that that's captured for the council meeting. Darren, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Madam Chair. In the new policy, we do actually say on the front page in the application that this policy does not override other legislative instruments such as liquor licensing laws. Is the request from Councillor Stratford further?
It doesn't use that strong words. If you could put those words in there, that would be great. It does not use that sentence.
Yes, that is in
just
the
one.
That is in the policy. Stand by, Donald.
Oh, there it is.
Madam Chair,
yes,
that is in
yes,
the policy.
Sorry, I've missed that line, Darren. Apologies.
Yeah.
I even highlighted it in my version, but I don't feel it goes far enough. Like you could still open, but you can't sell alcohol.
Councillor Stratford, would you be happy to take that offline to have that conversation with Darren and Donald between now and the council meeting, just to seek what that looked like? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I don't have any further questions. Speak now or forever hold. No, Kapai. So we'll move into debate. And in the interest of time, Member Napier has foreshadowed an amendment. So Member Napier, I might give the floor to you first for you to present your amendment and call for a seconder.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Madam Chair. I wish to move the following, and then after proposing the wording of the following, is it an opportunity for me to also speak to that?
Aye, so I'll call for a seconder and then that's your opportunity to speak to it.
Okay, all right. Then I will put in the chat so that it's clear as to what I am proposing. Where is that? There, did that work? I think it did. I wish to please move that the proposed Easter Sunday shop trading policy lie on the table to provide for email invited input from Christian organisations, including any interdenomination associations in the district.
Thank you, Member Napier. Do I have a seconder for this amendment?
I'm happy to second this.
I think Councillor Tepanier was slightly louder than you, Councillor Vucic, so I will take him. And then Member Napier, the floor is yours to speak to your amendment.
Madam Chair, apologies, Member Napier. Madam Chair, that foreshadowed amendment hasn't come through yet. I'm just chasing it down. Member Napier, would you send that to me again, please? Ngā mihi.
Yeah, sorry about that. Did that go through? I just pressed again the Did it come through?
I've received it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As I said, prefacing my question, my first question, this policy is principally about two things. One, commerce, and two, Easter. Now, I get why the policy development team would have specifically emailed invitations for input from unions representing shop workers and business associations in the district. I get that entirely. That addresses the one limb of importance to this policy. The other limb of importance to this policy is Easter. And for a number of reasons, and I think one of the principal ones being for the purpose of even-handedness in our policy making, it would be well for us to invite via email out specific invitations to Christian organisations in the district, inviting their input. Now, apart from even-handedness in policy making, that would also provide information that would surely helpfully inform the policy development team as they work up a proposed new policy. We spoke about, and in answer to my question, notification via newspapers and social media platforms and so forth. They were never going to get the type of input that would have been elicited from specifically the council emailing certain organisations, as was done for the commerce side of this equation. So it's no surprise to me that, as it turns out, probably coincidentally, the same number of submissions opposing for the purposes of the sanctity of Easter was the same in the last round, 24. How many submissions providing good information for policy development and even perhaps opposing the proposed policy might we have received if we had done that section of our community the same courtesy as we had offered the business sector of our community? Council policy is not for council. Council policy is for the community, and the community is comprised of a number of sectors and interests. And in this situation, it seems to me that one of those at least two important limbs with regard to this proposed policy was treated differently than the other Specifically, emails were sent out inviting input from that one sector. Now, I didn't ask the question, but I would take it as a policy 101 given, that when inviting submissions, it's not the number for and against that is compelling, so much as the compelling nature of the submissions themselves. But had specific email invited input been made to Christian organisations in the district, I'm certain that you would see the different numbers has been reported today as a result of the exercise that we undertook. And yeah, so if we Google, there are 50 Christian organisations. Isn't that wonderful? How about we send out 50 emails? Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my comments in support of my proposed amendment.
Kia ora, Member Napier. Councillor Tipinia is the seconder. The floor is yours.
Kia ora, Chair Smith, and thank you, Member Napier, because you've given me another way out other than having this conscious vote on this, because it was going to be either an abstention or against, to be honest, because for the reasons that you've raised, this policy doesn't stop, like food outlets from opening on Easter Sunday and all that, but I was concerned about our engagement with our wider community in this space, but didn't think that actually having an amendment that would invite those to feed into this process to have their say. So thank you for this amendment, and I do support it. Other than that, I'm happy to hear from other members and from our council team as well on whether this is a way we can go through this. Noting that Easter is a far way off, so we probably do have quite a bit of time. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Tipinia. Before I move to other members, I note Briar Corbett from our engagement team is here. Briar, I'd just like to give the floor to you from a technical point of view before I come back to members.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarification around why we didn't email all the churches and church groups that we identified. We thought that Christian groups in our stakeholder analysis, they were identified as high to medium interest, but low impact, meaning that while they're interested, the actual outcome may not have a high impact on them, whereas business associations are representative of a group of business owners. They're also high interest, but medium impact, as the outcome of the policy has the potential to impact their livelihood and around tourism, especially up here in the far north. Same with unions, medium impact on workers due to economic well-being, the opportunity to work, earn, support their families, as well as social well-being, which is the opportunity to have a day off because they can always say no to working on Easter Sunday. So that is why we emailed that group of people, but the Christian community were considered to be covered with the general public. So things like media releases, social media posts, public notices, email to our wider database, which is about 3,500 people. That's our kind of general public consultation, which takes in the wider community. Thank you.
Kia ora, Briar. Apologies, my mouse went AWOL and I couldn't unmute myself. That's helpful information, and going forward it would be great to have a brief summary of how that stakeholder engagement was defined in our policy work within the reports, because it does contextualise things. I do note that our CEO has his hand up, so I just wanted to pass the floor to him to see if he had any further input before I move back to members.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little concerned. I'm listening to the discussion and I just have a concern sitting in the back of my mind. This policy is put up basically under the legislation in terms of shop trading hours. So while I hear the concern from Member Napier, I think at times we're getting into a philosophical debate, and it's a bit like the large S versus lower S. We're missing the actual issue. This policy is provided for under the shop trading hours. It does not say the philosophical argument, which is a legal one. This policy is put in place simply under the shop trading hours 1990. If we start getting into these philosophical debates, then unfortunately we're probably not going to progress a policy. And I look at the previous discussion where we're looking at the disability and the implementation. The policy must be subservient to the Act, which we agree on, and then it also must comply with the LGA, which is the special consultative process. Bria has identified the stakeholder analysis, but I'm not sure that leaving a policy on the table and going through another round of consultation, my concern is, do the members have a policy that they are able to adopt today that is legally compliant? That's one of the key questions. If it is a case of asking staff to go back out to reconsult, then I am wishing to signal that is probably not, I need to understand exactly why this policy cannot be adopted as such, because it is a resource and timing commitment that I'm responsible for. Thank you.
Kia ora, Blair, and at the risk of debating with you, I think our policies also need to be fit for purpose for our communities, but I'll leave it to Member Napier to respond to you in his right of reply. So I have His Worship the Mayor and then Councillor Clendon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have is, why have we got specificity when actually, if we're going to go to Christian, and I hope I've got the amendment right, it should be religious groups, but actually we should be contacting all groups. This is a matter that includes all the community, and I'm just not sure why it is that we're, as I say, I hope I've heard the amendment right, that you're talking specifically about Christian. And I well understand the religious connotations, I understand that entirely. But I think if we are going to have a discussion, then it needs to be with the wider community, and just talking Christian, I think if we said religious groups and other interested groups or whatever, because that's our role. Our job is to ensure that we're representing all of the community. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mayor Carter. Councillor Clendon.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I've of a mind to support the amendment, I have to say. You know, as you know, my personal inclination is that I sort of look back with some pleasure to the good old days when things closed down for a few days at Easter, despite having been a retailer back in that day. But I also accept the majority is in favour of having shops open. But in the case that our new member has made, I think is quite compelling. I'm quite astonished to hear from Bria. It's been really useful hearing that these judgments are made in advance of consultation. I think the phrase she used was the Christian community, the religious community, would be high interest but low impact. And comparing that with retailers who have obviously a financial interest. I sort of challenge that line of thinking. Yes, obviously the Christian community has a very high interest in Easter. It's at least the equivalent of Christmas on the Christian calendar. And I'm really, yeah, I'm astonished, frankly, that there's such, I would have thought that the principle behind consultation ought to be as inclusive as we can possibly be. And if in doubt, to include people in the consultation. And where a group has been identified as having a high interest, I think it's an unfortunate, this is no criticism of Bryce, she simply outlined what I assume is their standing policy, that we'll make a judgment call about whether that interest is has a sort of reflects a high or low level of impact. I think that's a remarkable and not a particularly healthy assumption to make. It's a value judgment, and I simply don't accept that a financial interest should be given a higher value by council's consultative procedures than a moral or a spiritual one. That's quite extraordinary, and I'd really like to have a conversation about that at some later date. But for the moment, as I say, having heard all that, I'm of a mind to support the amendment. The Christian communities, and taking John's point too, the wider religious communities, because Easter has a significance to all sorts of different groups. So yes, I'm inclined to agree that we don't have the wording in front of us, but yeah, to say we specifically direct an invitation to the religious communities to have some input, to make some comment, and in the meantime, just let this document lie.
Thank you, Councillor Clinton. Member Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to speak against the amendment and will probably abstain from voting. My subdivision area, as you all know, is the Paihia subdivision area, which is the tourist hub for the Bay of Islands and the far north. People come and visit expecting to see trading open, unlike other towns, Kirikiri, Kaitaia. Other service centres are not always open all weekends. Holiday weekends are extremely busy, and if people were to come to town and find that shops weren't open or weren't trading in Russell and Paihia in particular, it would have a massive impact on the community at large. Just following on from the Christian aspect, and this may be of interest to you in your decision making, the historic stone church St Paul's on the waterfront in Paihia is actually an Anglican church, which is Christian. They hold service there on a Sunday morning. However, they do share with interdenominationally with the Catholic community, but the Catholic community have to have their service on a Saturday evening at 5:30 because the Anglican Church want it themselves on a Sunday. So you actually have people worshipping their day of worship on a Saturday evening that would normally worship on a Sunday in our village, in our town, on a regular basis. If you want to go to Mass on the Sunday and observe Easter Sunday Mass, then you must take the ferry ride to Russell to the Catholic Church over there and worship on a Saturday. I think if we're going to get into religion, and I am Christian, that we need to be very careful. I think we need to look at our tourist areas and what the community has to offer at large, and we have to take into consideration the four well-beings, and that is the economic, social, cultural, and perhaps we should have a fifth one, which is religion. I'll leave you with those thoughts.
Thank you, Member Ward. Councillor Collard.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I do not support the amendment. I'm of the belief that we are currently trading on Easter Sunday as it is and have been for at least a year, if not more. I want us to recall the fact that we are representing people in the community. Now, people in the community have jobs. They work to survive in this current time. And we've got to cater to that a bit. If we indeed came up with an option to close on a Sunday, it would mean services would not be available. And that means the holidaymakers and tourists that come in have got to bring things from other places. And that would be detrimental to the economic viability, which I think is very strong. I support religion, most definitely. I have no problem with that. But certainly jobs, commercial viability, and the fact that we've got to live here and we've got to be seen to servicing the people, our visitors, etc. So I can't support the amendment. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Collards. Do I have any further speakers before I pass back to Member Napier for his right of reply? No, Member Napier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the opportunity to have put the amendment, and thank you for those who have responded to my putting of that. That which the Chief Executive calls philosophical debates, in my mind, are actually about the community mindedness and our discharge of a moral and ethical duty to the wider community. So I would welcome the continuation of philosophical debates, if that's what they are to be called. And in terms of being community minded, in the discharge of what I've called an ethical duty, somewhere at the top of the list of that is even-handedness in our approach, even-handedness in our procedures, even-handedness in our policy making. In this case, as I've already had the opportunity to note, this particular policy is essentially about two key limbs. One is commerce, the other is Easter. In bringing forth this policy before your committee, Madam Chair, there was a deliberate, and as I've said, I understand exactly why it would have been done, a deliberate move to target and with a degree of specificity email invitations for input to but one of those limbs. And if we were to focus on the policy making aspects of this, even more so than the spiritual or religious aspects for a minute, just for that very point alone, may I suggest, Madam Chair, that it is worthwhile for this policy to sit on the table until we get that part right. One of the members, I'm sorry, I don't recall who, mentioned in the debate that an opportunity for this is a community policy, and I take on board Mia Carter's point. If it's more acceptable to change the wording of the amendment from Christian organisations to religious organisations, then fine. But the point is that in terms of this policy, the religious, the spiritual, the Christian, however we're going to label that aspect, is key. And in our policy making, we have not addressed that. And so, Madam Chair, I would commend the amendment to the members of the committee, and I will vote in favour of that amendment, obviously, and thank you for the opportunity to have been able to put that.
Kia ora, Member Napier. So at this point, we'll put the amendment to the vote. So we have an amendment that the proposed Easter Sunday shop trading policy lie on the table to provide for email invited input from Christian organisations, including any interdenomination, associations in the district. Moved by Member Napier, seconded by Councillor Tipania. If we could get the voting up, that would be great, please, Marlima.
Madam Chair, can I just confirm the wording around Christian versus religious? Both are to remain, or just one or the other?
I'll leave that in the hands of Member Napier and Councillor Tipania. Member Napier?
Oh, I'm happy for it to be changed to religious, and I'll leave it for Councillor Tipania to support or otherwise.
Happy to change that wording to religious.
Kapai, thank you. So that tweak has been made. I am in favour. Councillor Clendon.
In favour.
Mayor Carter.
In favour.
Deputy Mayor Court.
Oppose.
Councillor Collard.
Opposed.
Councillor Foy.
In favour.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Tipania.
In favour.
Councillor Vucic.
In favour.
Member Ward.
Abstain.
Member Napier.
In favour.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
Kapai, that has passed. So that brings us to the end of that item. Thank you, everybody, for that robust debate and for that opportunity to always do better, Member Napier. It's a good reminder for us all. At this point, we have been sitting for almost 2 hours, so I'm going to invite the committee to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back. We've got our final 3 items, which I'm sure we will crank through at pace. So I will see everybody back here at 11:40. Kia ora. Kia ora koutou and welcome back. I hope you all had time to grab a coffee and you're nice and fresh back for our last couple of items. So that brings us to item 5.3, amendments to community initiated infrastructure roading contribution policy. The recommendation is that the Strategy and Policy Committee recommends the Council adopt the amended community initiated infrastructure roading contribution policy 2022. Do I have a mover, please? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Stratford.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'm not moving.
Oh, yeah. Councillor Stratford, do I have a seconder, please? I am happy to second it to get it on the table. Goodness, we're quiet today. Darren, we will hand the floor to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. That might be a suggestion that this will be well debated. So let's look forward to that. Look, just really briefly looking at the executive summary, this report, and doing the review of a number of roading policies, we identified some work was needed to tidy up this through amendment, one being the method of consultation, tidying up the policy to ensure that it aligned with what the waka kotahi funding models look like, and also how we operationalise the process. So Kirsten Griffiths, our report writer, has put a lot of work into this paper. Kirsten's joining us from Australia today, so this really just shows for me how we are a really forward-thinking council and how our staff can work just anywhere, and it's seamless. So Kirsten, welcome along, and I'll pass to you for any further comment.
Kia ora koutou and g'day from rural New South Wales. It's good to see you and good that the technology is working well. So thank you, Darren. Yes, as Darren said, this is one of a number of roading policies that was reviewed. And we did a workshop on this policy, the Community Initiated Infrastructure Roading Contribution Policy. We did a workshop with elected members in May. The discussion at the workshop was quite robust, and so while it wasn't unanimous opinions on it, the general direction was to continue the policy with some amendments. Most of the amendments are actually rather minor, so they're to do with tidying up the policy, because the old policy actually has quite a bit of out-of-date information, particularly the waka kotahi subsidy has changed, so we need to align it with that. There were some references in the policy to things that are no longer in place that needed to be removed, and also we recommended taking the operational material out of the policy, and because in fact when this policy has been implemented recently, there is an existing updated version of the operational procedures in place already, which refers to NTA rather than the previous iterations. So the main other change is to do, as Darren said, with the method of consultation. So previously it said communities would undertake their own consultation. However, this doesn't really work that well in practice, and so the recommendation based on advice from staff and from our experiences of implementing this policy in the past is that it really should be undertaken by council. Other than that, I think that's probably the key points there. Very happy to take any questions about this amended policy, if there's any things that people would like to raise.
Thank you, Kirsten. I've got Deputy Mayor Court to kick us off with questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and just a quick shout out to Democracy Services who lower my virtual hand for me. Thank you so much, ladies, for that. I can't multitask that well. March, I'm struggling to remember what we discussed at the workshop in March.
May, I believe it was actually.
May.
Yeah, I could look at the exact date, but yeah,
it's even worse.
Some time ago. Yes, yeah.
Was there discussion around 100% rather than the 69-31% funding share that we have in the policy now? The reason I'm asking, and I'll get to this later in the debate, but for my question now, I'm toying with an amendment. And so I'm just asking for some clarity on what the conversation was at the time around the percentage rates, or did we determine purely to move this in a line with the far rate of the day? Thank you.
There was some discussion around the rate. However, the overall sense was to align it with the current far rate, whatever that is, and as you know, that can change. Yes, there was some discussion though over it, whether it would be higher or lower. Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten. Happy, Deputy Mayor Court? Great. Councillor Foy and then Councillor Stratford.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just getting all my devices, lowering hands, etc. And thank you to council staff for attending internationally today. I have some questions that interrelate with other policies that council have, namely the policy 4103, limits of council responsibility for formation/maintenance of roads, and also how that interrelates with Chapter 15 of the District Plan, which relates to land use provision and the standard of the roads. Why I ask this is because this policy, historically was for sealing of roads. However, we recognise that 1,600 kilometres of our roads are metalled roads, and our ratepayers, although they may want it sealed, may also want to upgrade the road. And there is in my view, convoluted process which is not set out under policy for anyone wishing to do so. And that relates across both the maintenance policy that I just quoted, Chapter 15 of the District Plan, as well as the NTA's own internal policies. It would be great to have heard from the safety engineer from the NTA about unmaintained council roads and how this relates to that, or how one goes about forming that. I've also queried this to our General Manager, Darren, and I gave him specific examples. I've not received a response to those as yet. And the last staff member would be our Maintenance Manager, who actually directs the contractors to go out and undertake the maintenance of that portion of road or not. This policy here is silent on that aspect, and I think that's an error of policy. And I would like to hear from, specifically, if I could, the NTA, because they're the people that direct the contractors, but also from the District Plan team in terms of consideration of land use permitted baseline and how that goes about interrelating with this policy. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Foy. Those are all really important issues, and I think we are all very, very much aware that roads in this district is serious, very serious and large issue for many people. So, and as you quite rightly point out, there is the additional the other roading policy which is in review is the limits of council responsibility for the formation and maintenance of roads policy, which is much more a roading policy. So this particular policy that we've got here is much more a finance policy. So it's actually Janice who implements this policy and has implemented in the past. So this one is really very much focused on the funding arrangements to do with these roading upgrades or the sealing of unsealed roads particularly. So it's very much Janice's in a finance policy. Unfortunately, Janice is not able to be with us. I have messaged with her, but she's actually stuck, unable to dial in at the moment. But I can address questions to her about that. The other policy, the limits of council responsibility for formation and maintenance of roads, it is being worked on, and a further workshop is planned with NTA staff, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, for us to, internal staff workshop to really try and get at those issues that you've raised. So yes, you are quite correct that this policy doesn't discuss anything to do with engineering, with the district plan, all that sort of stuff. That's because this is very much a finance policy, and so it doesn't really address those wider issues. And I don't know that we can bring that in for this particular one. This one's to do much more with the funding.
Councillor Foy, supplementary?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kirsten. I understand your role in your department. However, my questions are always holistic across all the silos of council. Specifically, when it comes to Janice in the finance department, we have a new NTA method of upgrading unsealed roads and a centre of excellence around that. So I could give some examples where a local road may want to upgrade their road to reflect the centre of excellence. This policy does not specifically prescribe it as just for sealing. The policy relates to roading upgrades and therefore, and also the vesting of that and the ongoing maintenance of that. So although Janice, this is a policy that Janice relates to, the implementation of this is actually from a completely different department. And the NTA always asks the planning department to do a planning assessment, and they'll consider those access provisions. And then the NTA will further look at the engineering standards and introducing that into the maintenance policy. That's why I think that this current policy is not fit for purpose, and we should be looking at all the policies collectively, getting all those parties in the room and making sure that it is fit for purpose. So my view is I'll be voting against this today until those holistic things are done, and I'll be moving an amendment to reflect that.
Thank you, Councillor Foy.
Kia ora, Councillor Foy. Darren, just for clarification, do we have anyone from NTA here?
No, Madam Chair, we don't.
Thank you. Councillor Stratford.
Thank you. Madam Chair, you might be able to answer this, or Darren. Why does this policy not get consulted on with the community? This is a policy that will have impact on rates and people's ability to pay their rates. Why does it not get consulted on with the public?
May I take that? Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Yes. So the amendments that have been suggested for this proposal are purely to correct the policy. So we're not making any changes to the policy settings. The current policy settings are that the funding is in line with waka kotahi subsidy, whereas the previous policy says it's in line with the waka kotahi subsidy, but gives a figure which is out of date, so on and so forth, and various things that are out of date. So because we're not changing the policy settings for this particular policy, it wasn't considered to be a change that warranted going out for consultation, with the costs involved in that. The only time, so Janice advised me that she couldn't think of any instance where this policy has been used where it was done in a way other than a targeted rate, but that targeted rate will only happen after a consultative procedure on that. So there'll be a consultation on that specific targeted rate with the people affected in the area of benefit. And Janice knows much more about the detail of that than I do, but that's the gist of it, is that it's always consulted on for the particular project that's being considered. I should remind elected members again, this policy has only been used twice in the last 5 years. It's not frequently used. So it's when we were weighing up about whether or not it required this amendment to go for public consultation, it's possibly counterproductive to kind of get into something that is only seldom used and will always be consulted on a case-by-case basis anyway, particularly when we're not altering the policy settings fundamentally. I hope that addresses that concern.
I think, though, like when we have people foreshadowing amendments that, the local share could be changed to 100%. That's quite significant, isn't it?
Yes.
And
yes.
then the potential for not having the policy, that's quite significant.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I think I also need to ask, when in the policy we've had if 75% that live in the area of benefit support this policy being used as a tool to get people's roads upgraded to seal, what happens to the other 75%? Not sorry, you know, what happens to the ones that didn't vote for that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So
and I know the answer to that.
Yeah.
They end up having to pay the burden of rates for something that they can't afford to pay for.
Yes.
Unless there's something special done, which I know in the last case there was a couple that were able to be mitigated out of that scenario, but that hasn't happened at the one before that, the road that was sealed then. I'll save the rest of my kōrero for debate. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kirsten.
Do I have any further questions? No, Kirsten, I have one question, and it's just around my concern around the ambiguity of what triggers for council to then work with community to conduct that consultation and make the decision. And my question isn't limited to this scenario, it's more principled, and you could apply it, for example, also to the conversation around targeted rates. My concern is that we don't seem to have any guiding principles that will trigger for council to be required to work with that community for consultation, and that if we were to adopt this, then it would be at the discretion of council officers as to when and when not they would undertake that consultation. So I was just wanting a little bit of context around that and some comfort, please.
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. Yes, that's a tricky one to codify in the policy. Just looking back historically over the cases where this has been used, there's been instances where it's just been a few houses at the end of a road that have wanted a bit of extra seal, and so the trigger would be fairly minimal because you're only talking about a handful of people that you'd be contacting, right through to quite a large project that would involve a wide area of benefit and a large number of residents. And then so finding an appropriate threshold for triggering this process is actually quite there's not one size fits all. It's a case by case kind of thing. So while I do understand what you're raising there, that to get some sort of guidance about when we would press go on sort of investing and investigating a project like this, it's a little bit determined by the size of the project that's being proposed. So I'm not sure if there's a better way to put it in the policy than at the moment. It is kind of at discretion of staff because we have not found a one size. So we haven't found a way to codify it in a way that would capture that breadth of different size projects that this could apply to.
Thank you, Kirsten. I don't have any further questions at this point, so we'll move into debate. I'm aware that Councillor Court and Councillor Foy have both foreshadowed an amendment. Would you like to paper, scissors, rock as to who goes first? I think Councillor Court, you signalled first, so I will hand the floor to you to table your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually in two minds at this point whether to vote against this or amend it. So I'll just take you on a wee journey down memory lane, particularly for our new members who may not be aware of the history. So we are entirely reliant on the government policy statement of the day as to whether Waka Kotahi is able to fund seal extensions or not. And I've been an elected member for a very long time, since 1996, and I've watched government policy statements change. So one term seals are on the agenda, the next term seals are off the agenda. And we have 2,500 kilometres of network in the Far North District. We have the longest network in the North Island, of which 1,600 kilometres is unsealed. We get lobbied all the time for sealing, all the time. And we simply cannot afford to do it all. So this policy was written at a time when sealing was off the agenda, and it gave the community an ability to pay for sealing. Since then, we've written, the Far North District Council wrote the dust remit, and that was supported at National Council, and it went on to a National Working Party. And as a result of the dust remit, dust is now a fundable activity in the National Land Transport Plan within budget, within finite budgets. And we put local ratepayers' money aside to meet our share of that, which is 31% of the cost. And we've developed the matrix, and I don't want to get in a debate today about whether we think that the matrix is perfect or not, but we've developed a matrix, and that matrix prioritises every single road across the district based on 22 assessment criteria, over 40,000 inputs, and through an algorithm tells us where we should be spending the money. It takes the squeaky wheel out of the occasion, and it takes the Eastern Ward, Western Ward, Northern Ward out of the debate. This defines an assessment criteria where we should spend precious ratepayer resources based on need. That, in my mind, supersedes the need for a policy. My concern with this policy, and I've been involved with four roads, Hupara, Darwin, Pa and Tanikaha, and the staff will correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't think of a single road that has been sealed under this policy that did not happen outside of the Eastern Ward, not one. And it's clearly articulated in the staff report that an issue arises as to whether this policy is equitable. Only communities who have the resources to raise a significant portion of the costs themselves can access funds available via this policy. And that's true. It's discriminatory in that regard, because only people that can afford to pay extra can access this policy and therefore get their roads sealed. And the other 31% of all of that cost is coming from the ratepayers across the entire district. The ratepayers are paying that cost. And when you seal a road, you improve its property values, you improve vehicle wear, tear and maintenance, but also you commit the ratepayers to the ongoing cost of maintenance of that road, and sealed roads are more expensive than gravel roads. So the whole policy raises, in my mind, the issue of fairness. Having said that, if people want to pay to seal their roads, and that money needs to be borrowed and paid back over time, there should be a policy there that would enable them to do that. But I think they should meet 100% of the costs, and that should not be subsidised by the ratepayer. And that 31% of ratepayer funding should be going in the general bucket to address the priorities that we have identified through the dust matrix of communities that really, really do need intervention. So I'm moving an amendment that I'll just go back to it. Number 2, on the community initiated infrastructure roading contribution policy under policy statements 2, and that is page 2 of 4 in the paper agenda, that the community must contribute the entire cost. I've also been at consultation Hui, and it is extremely unfortunate when the community is divided. I remember attending the Hui at Hupara Road, and there were those that were passionately for and those that just simply could not afford it. And the pressure that was brought to bear on those who could not afford it was really uncomfortable to observe. But if you end up with 75% voting in support, it's the other 25% have to absorb the cost. So my view is, Madam Chair, to sum it up, I don't think we need this policy anymore because the dust matrix had superseded it. But if we are going to keep it in interest of fairness to everyone, then the community should pay 100% of the cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court. So you've moved an amendment, and if you could pop that in the chat for the governance team, that would be really useful. unless I've missed that, and apologies. So I'm just going to call for a seconder for Deputy Mayor Court's amendment, and then I'll let Kirsten speak to it from a technical point of view. Do I have a seconder for Deputy Mayor Court's amendment?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor
Clark.
Clark. So that amendment has been moved and seconded. Kirsten and or Darren, if you've got any technical response, that would be useful before I open to debate. Thank you.
Just a couple of things. One is that if depending on, we'll look at our significance and engagement policy, but some substantial amendments to this policy might mean we would need to go out for consultation. And also another reminder, I think elected members are probably already aware of this, but if we vote against this amended policy, that will mean the existing policy will remain in place. So it would be an amendment to revoke the policy if we wanted to remove the policy altogether. Just a technical thing there.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, just point of order. Could we see the proposed amended version, please? I'm looking in the chat. It's not in there, and I don't like talking about something.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, it is in the chat. I put it in at 11:55 a.m.
I'm just wondering, and it would be useful to get some advice from our governance support team, whether or not that amendment needs to be further contextualised. Deputy Mayor Court, I'm aware that you were requesting that that's an amendment to point 2 of the policy statement on page 1 of 2 of the policy. Is that correct?
That is correct. And just for clarity, this is 100% ratepayer contribution from those on the road. This has no rating implication.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but the motion's before us. Sorry, now it's gone again. That the Strategy Committee recommend Council adopt the amended policy 2022. And what's the next part of the proposal?
I was just going to ask.
The amendment is to increase the local share to 100%. Well, that doesn't make sense as a motion, so it needs to be corrected.
Thank you, Councillor Clendon. I was just going to ask for our governance team to give some advice on the best wording to achieve that outcome. I agree it doesn't make sense, so we need to ensure that we're really clear as to what we're looking to amend in the policy. Malima or Aisha, do you have any advice for us at this point around the wording of that amendment, please?
Through the chair, Madam Chair, could I have the page number again, and we will look into getting that wording up on screen for you.
Kapai, so it's page 49 of the agenda, page 1 of 2 of the proposed policy, and it's specific to the policy statement section, and point 2 of that at the bottom of that page 1 of 2.
Point 2, thank you. One moment.
Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just so we're clear, because I'm working off a paper copy. I'm actually looking at page 2 of 4, not 1 of 2. Page 2 of 4. In the paper copy, it's page 52. Shows the track changes to the policy. And it says that the number 2, policy statements. Number 2, the community must contribute the equivalent of the current Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency subsidy funding assistance rate, and council shall fund the balance of all costs. My amendment is that is changed to the community must contribute 100% of the cost.
Thank you. Darren, are you able to just give a little bit of technical support as to how we best clear that up, please?
Sure. I just see that Aisha has her hand up, so before I make comment, maybe we go to her because she's always got nuggets of gold, and then we can see if there's anything I can add.
Aish, thank you.
Thanks, Darren, and Madam Chair. So I think to clarify what the committee is looking to do is recommend the change. So the recommendation, I think, should read that the section of the policy be amended, or that the committee recommend council adopt the policy subject to the following change, and then we can change this point 2, and then it should be easy.
That's useful. Thank you, Aisha. Just for clearing up of my mind, perhaps Kirsten, you could clarify for me, the 4-page document is the original document with the track changes and the 2-page is the amended document. Is that correct? Oh, you're just on mute.
Yes, that's correct. So the shorter document is the amended proposed policy. The longer one with the red track changes is the previous policy. It should reflect everything that's been changed. Yeah.
Just so we're really clear, and then we can get it on the screen then, Aisha, to your recommendation, which I think was really useful. Perhaps if we could note that and the amendment be made to policy statement 2 of the policy, that the contribution must be the whole contribution. Deputy Mayor Court, just so I'm really clear in my mind as to what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I get terribly confused when I have old copies, track copies and new copies. So you were correct. Thank you, and I apologise for the confusion.
Not at all, not at all. I'm glad we worked that through. So Aisha and Marlema, perhaps if you've got some suggested wording and we could get that on the screen. And in the meantime, that was proposed by Deputy Mayor Court, seconded by Councillor Collard. So Councillor Collard, I might just hand the floor to you, and hopefully that will give time for that wording to be up there and further members to speak to the amendment. Councillor Collard.
Certainly, thank you, Madam Chair. I support the Deputy Mayor's dialogue that she had earlier on in relation to the sharing of the costs and the consequence of the ratepayer subsidising a particular piece of work. And I believe that it is only fair that those people that are the beneficiaries of the work pay for the work. And that's the reason for me to second this motion is exactly that. The user must pay.
Thank you, Councillor Collard. Councillor Vucic.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, I failed to listen to Councillor Court's arguments, and they seem contradictory to me. When 100% of the people are at 100% in terms of affordability, that would make it less affordable, I would have thought, to those that are trying to do the road. They still can be outvoted. The matrix sure is about dust. This is about new roads, and generally when there is something that's actually happening and they put a private road in and they want to make it available. So forgive me if I got something wrong, but the argument seems to be inconsistent there. When there is a new subdivision done and there's a new section of road done, then surely there has to be a way that it can get into a council-run road. And this, I think, policy needs to be in place, I think, for all roads, including dust matrix roads. And I've argued that before. There needs to be a policy. A matrix is a tool. It is not a policy. Governance only and can ever put instructions through a policy structure. So I'm all for policy. I think there are some issues. I understand what staff are saying. A more pragmatic and practical approach would be to connect it with the Waka Kotahi recommendations, and that to me is reasonable. It's quite a burden still, 69% I believe at the moment, and so I can't support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vucic. Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I recognise the amendment from Councillor Court. I have to say I do agree with that amendment, and the reason I do so is because what Councillor Vucic raised is not factual. When someone does a subdivision, that's a condition of their subdivision, then the onus is on that individual, not for the collective. For my amendment, which will be done next, the implementation of moving it from a council unmaintained council road, so it's an illegal road reserve. It's vested and designated as a road, but what happens is they're not on the maintenance schedule, and there might be more than 5 users of that road, but because it isn't up to the maintained council standard, they cannot bring it over into the maintenance schedule. This is the issue that I'm highlighting about the very poor uptake of this policy. The reason for that is because there is no holistic working together of the NTA, the district plan, and this policy. For it to be 100% contribution, that means that all of those users that want it to be upgraded and to be brought over into the maintenance schedule have the tool to do so by being facilitated by council staff through the rating provisions. It's 100% user pays, and then also then allows a mechanism for that to be moved over as a maintenance item on that maintenance schedule. So that's why I agree with this amendment, and it follows on to my amendment in terms of the practical implementation across all the silos. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foy. Roger, you've got your hand up.
Madam Chair, just looking at the amendment and just wondering that potentially adding something in there about a test of significance of engagement, if we're going to start making changes to policy. At the moment it reads adopt, and I'm not indicating that this is significant, but it's significant as per our test, but just something to consider in the amendment.
Thank you, Roger. I'm wondering if that testing might happen between now and when it was to go to council, so that technical advice could be provided at that point. Would that be?
Yep, we're getting confirmation of that right now. So just in the background, we're just having a look at that. Yep.
That's great. Thank you. Just seeing if I've got Councillor Stratford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've kind of lost where we're up to. We're at an amendment put by Councillor Court that this is 100% funded by the community. And as I raised in my earlier question, if 75% of your community want this to be want this policy to be activated, the rest of that 100% generally have to pay as well. So I feel that we're putting a further financial burden on those that have moved into an area that, you know, for decades has had an unsealed road, and now, you know, potentially is going to be sealed, and they will, you know, they've lived there blissfully, you know, fine without it being sealed, but a developer moves in and then uses this policy as a tool to get their road sealed. That's what happened in the most recent case, and people were rated out of their property. So yeah, I can't support the 100%, and I feel if we want to play around the edges of this policy any further, it needs to go out for consultation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Stratford. Thank you for that. So at this point, I have no further speakers. Deputy Mayor Court, would you like Ryder for reply?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Vucic referred to this being about new roads or new subdivisions. It is not. I want to be very clear about that. Any new roads or any new subdivisions will be captured under the Resource Management Act. So that would be a condition of their consent. This is about existing unsealed roads in our district where the residents are asking for the road to be sealed. The road doesn't qualify for sealing under any instrument that we currently have, either within the council or within the Waka Kotahi funding model. So this is about them being able to come forward and say, actually, we don't like living on a gravel road, we want it sealed, and we're prepared to meet 69% of the cost, but the ratepayer will pick up the other 31%. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because that gives people the ability to jump the queue and use 31% of district-wide collected rates to advance their roads. And that 31% can be used to advance priority roads as developed by an instrument that council has, Waka Kotahi has. What this means is that the communities who are have the ability to pay can leap ahead of communities that don't. That is an equity issue in my mind. Councillor Foy talks about council's policy on non-maintained roads, and I have a vested interest in that Councillor Foy has been helping me with. I own property on a road that council is a paper road. It is not a maintained council road. So that is a red herring, because this policy only applies to council maintained roads. But I do accept Councillor Foy's argument that that other policy is full of holes and we need to fix it. This should not trigger significance and engagement, because this is not asking the ratepayer to pay anything. This is the community asking for us to loan the money, seal the road, just like a mortgage, and they pay it back 100%. There is some cost in staff time, there's some cost in administration, but they are negligible and they can be built in. I do accept Councillor Stratford's point about the 75%. I can't argue against that. She's categorically correct. At the moment, if 75% of the residents vote for it, the other 25% have to pay for it whether they like it or not. I don't know whether that should be 100%. I haven't gone down that route. I just want to acknowledge that. I think her point is valid. I don't think her point around whether the developer moves in and wants the road sealed is valid, because I come back again to the Resource Management Act. So if there's a significant activity happening on the road, then that should be captured under the Resource Management Act, and that would be a condition of consent that they need to upgrade or seal the road. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court. And I just want to take this opportunity to apologise, Councillor Clendon. I had asked that the wording of that amendment be put on the screen so that you were able to speak to it clearly, which I haven't done. So I can only apologise for that. Malima, is there any chance we can get that correct wording on the screen, please, just for us all to digest? Deputy Mayor Court, are you happy with that wording?
Yes, and huge thank you to Democracy Services.
Thank you. Councillor Collard is the seconder. Are you happy with that wording?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. And I'm going to step well outside of standing orders at this point. Apologies. But Councillor Clendon, now that you've had opportunity to see that wording, were you wanting to speak to this or against this amendment at all?
No, I intend to oppose the amendment. I just wonder, it probably works in context. There's no definition of community, but I suppose in the context of the whole document, it's understood that what you're talking about is the community of interest who are wanting this road done. Yeah, so that's fine. No, I mean, well, a couple of things. I think the dust matrix conversation's a bit of a red herring, to use that popular phrase this morning. I bet there's nobody in Northland this week complaining about dust. I'll guarantee that, because there isn't any. It's about quality of roads. You know, the reason a community might want their road done is because of potholes or unsafe sight lines or dips or all sorts of reasons. So this minor obsession with dust we seem to be developing, it's important. It is significant in summer, I know, but it's not the only reason by any means. I don't buy the argument about equity, frankly. I think if people are willing to put their money where their mouth is and say we want better infrastructure and we're willing to pay up front for it, so be it. I acknowledge Kelly's concern, yes, that it might disadvantage a minority who may struggle with the affordability. But on that argument, you know, we would never put rates up. We would simply cut back services. So yeah, that's enough from me anyway. As I say, I think the amendment does make sense now, and I intend to vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Clendon, and because I'm clearly on fire with my lack of standing orders today, Deputy Mayor Court, I want to try and get back into the rhythm. So if you'd like a brief right of reply to that, you're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, having heard from Councillor Clinton, if everyone actually appreciates what the amendment says. So Councillor Clinton said if the community want to pay for it, well, we should let them. That's exactly what this amendment does, but they pay for it, not everybody else. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court. So we've had a good, solid, robust debate on this amendment. It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Court and seconded by Councillor Collard. We'll put it to the vote at this point. Thank you, Marlena. I'm in support. Councillor Clendon.
Opposed.
Mayor Carter.
In favour.
Deputy Mayor Court.
In favour.
Councillor Collard.
In favour.
Councillor Foy.
In favour.
Councillor Stratford.
Against.
Councillor Tipinia.
Abstain.
Councillor Vusic. Member Ward.
Abstain.
Member Napier.
In favour.
Member Kyle.
Abstain.
Councillor
Madam
Vusic.
Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I'm against, and on page 51 it talks about policy actually.
Thank you,
specifically
Member
states new
Vusic.
roads.
Thank you, Member Vusic, voting only. So that is carried. Thank you. That becomes part of the substantive motion. So Councillor Foy, at this point, I will give you opportunity to put your amendment on the table.
Namahi, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, it's just started raining quite heavily here, so apologies if it cuts out. I've got my policy there, my amendment there in the chat, as well as some narrative around some background of my logic in this amendment. I personally know several examples of people that have tried to have their road moved over into the maintenance schedule and upgrade their roads. These are unsealed roads, not sealed roads. And the policy itself is not just for sealed roads. Nowhere in the policy does it say that. This is why I'm moving this amendment. Not that I disagree with the policy, it's just that the policy does not reflect the outcomes that are needed for dozens and dozens of ratepayers that will actually utilise this policy if it's upgraded to this effect. And I think it's an error today that we don't have the NTA staff here and we don't have any of the planners, because if you ask them, they will tell you all of the conditions, 2 pages of all the upgrade, the cost, there's no instrument to share that cost. And also there's no consistency of approach. That's why I've moved this amendment today. I'm not sure when we would have that workshop. It doesn't even need to be a workshop with elected members there, as long as the internal staff can do that and table it and bring it back to us, so that we know that this is addressed across all the different silos of council and the people who actually do that mahi, namely our maintenance engineers, our planners, and the rating instrument in the rating department, which will make this a reality for our people. Nami, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Foy, and again, falling out of standing orders, I should have called for a seconder of your amendment before I let you speak to that. So can I get a seconder for Councillor Foy's amendment, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Tipinia. And as seconder, the floor is now yours if you'd like to make any comments.
Just to talk what Felicity has raised. Happy for this amendment to go to debate.
Kia ora, Councillor Tipinia. Do I have any speakers for or against this amendment, please?
Against, Madam Chair, I'd like to speak.
The floor is yours, Deputy Mayor Court.
Sorry, I couldn't find my little hand icon, so forgive my lapse in protocol. At the risk of overcomplicating things, we have a number of policies. One of the policies that we currently have on the, and I can't remember the number at the moment, and it's one that has affected me personally until fairly recently, is that there are a number of roads in this district where council does not maintain them. the policy says that once certain levers are triggered, council will take over the maintenance of the road. We did not have a mechanism to capture when those levers were triggered. And it took an awful lot of work on behalf of myself and my neighbours to get council to comply with the conditions of the policy and take over the maintenance of our road. That's just been signed off, so I no longer have a vested interest. I can talk about it. That's a separate thing from being on a council maintained road and asking for it to be upgraded. It's a completely separate issue, and that policy needs a whole new rewrite. And I don't wish to see that clouded with this policy, which will stall this policy, and it becomes confused. And the resolution has gone from the screen now, so I can't see what else it was. Can we get that back up, please, ladies? Thank you. And in regard to the process for upgrading unsealed roads, we do have a matrix, and the matrix doesn't just talk about dust. The matrix talks about a whole raft of assessment criteria that need to be captured. So I don't know that there's any merit to be gained by revisiting that at this point. And regard to the road vesting to the maintenance schedule, that sits in the policy I just talked about. I think that covers it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Court. Councillor Stratford.
I can't remember my question, I'm sorry. You're welcome, everybody.
Kapai, thank you. Do I have any further speakers to this amendment? I might just take an opportunity to make a quick comment. I'm on the fence as to whether or not to support this. And Councillor Foy, I want to acknowledge your continuous requests for NTA to be attending our meetings and ensure that they have input. Just flagging, Darren, that I had requested that at our agenda preview, and I followed that up with an email to NTA. They assured me that they would be here today. And so for process, I'm feeling quite torn as to how to support this, because I'm also with Councillor Foy and that we need to ensure that we're getting across organisation in our policies, especially our roading policies, when our roading is overseen by NTA, which sits outside of our organisation. I have a vested interest on this amendment because I have been in two minds of foreshadowing my own in regards to the community initiated support that has been removed from this policy. I note that there was a community assistance framework in place previously with this policy that would trigger when council would work with community. I have real concerns around the ambiguity and discretion that will be applied if communities make requests. So I would consider being in favour of this amendment in order to be able to clean that up clearly as well. However, I do recognise the points that have been made, so I'll be taking that on board in my voting. But we have no further speakers at this point, so we will put it to the vote at this point. Councillor Clendon.
Support the amendment.
Mayor Carter.
In support.
Deputy Mayor Court.
Oppose.
Councillor Collard.
Support.
Councillor Foy.
Support.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Tipanea.
In support.
Councillor Vucic. Member Ward.
Support.
Member Napier.
Support.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
And I will support as well. So that is carried. So that becomes the substantive motion. I'm aware, Councillor Stratford, that you have foreshadowed an amendment. So I just want to check with you as to whether or not that is still relevant at this point and whether or not you'd like to proceed.
No, because what comes out of the workshop may actually be that staff decide that it needs to go out for consultation. Perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stratford. And Darren, perhaps if I can seek some technical advice as to how I can best capture my concerns around that community assistance framework and whether we can wrap that into this piece of work as well without putting an amendment to the table. Just keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, thank you. Just before I do, your point with the NTA, we had reached out several times to the NTA requesting their attendance. I'm assuming that because of the recent severe weather events that we've seen, that they are probably dealing with that. Might I suggest that you have a note in relation to what you're wanting to add to this substantive? Just a note at the bottom so that it's captured that way.
That's useful. Thank you, Darren. So we now have a resolution on the table that has become the substantive motion. At this point, I'll call for any further amendments that anybody would like to make before I make a note and put it to the vote. Any further amendments?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Because Councillor Foy's amendment was to leave this report lay on the table, anything further from that becomes discussion at a workshop, so no further amendments are required. They all go to a workshop for discussion.
Kia ora. Thank you, Marlema. So on that note, can I just please request that a note is made that the development of a community assistance framework be explored as part of that workshop?
Duly noted, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And at this point, we've now got a resolution on the table as the substantive motion, so we'll put it to the vote. Marlema, if we could just get that up on the screen, that would be useful. Thank you. So the resolution in front of us that this policy lay on the table, we'll now put it to the vote. I'm in favour. Councillor Clendon.
In favour.
Mayor Carter.
In favour.
Deputy Mayor Court.
Opposed, direct negative.
Councillor Collard.
Opposed. Sorry,
Councillor...
no, I'm for that.
In support, Councillor Collard.
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Foy.
Support.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Tipania.
In favour.
Councillor Vusic. Member Ward.
Abstain.
Member Napier.
Aye.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
That has passed. Thank you, everybody.
Chair, are you happy? Sorry, are you happy for Councillor Vusic's vote to be recorded as abstain? I didn't hear or see.
Thank you. And perhaps if somebody could check in on his connectivity, that would be useful. Thank you.
No problem.
So that brings us to our final item before our action sheet. I just want to gauge the feelings of the committee. I'm really mindful that we have given some really robust debate to each of our 3 items this morning. We do have a hearing scheduled for 1:30 this afternoon for those who can make it. So I just want to check the comfort of the committee. Are we happy to carry on with this item and then have what is, I imagine, maybe a brief break before those brief hearings? Or would you like to break now for lunch and then come back and potentially adjourn for the hearings? Everybody happy to just carry on? Speak now or forever?
Aye.
Ka pai. Let's just crank on, hey? So that brings us to item 6.1, Resident Opinion Survey 2021-22, the recommendation that the Strategy and Policy Committee receive the report, Resident Opinion Survey 21-22. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder?
Kia ora, Ruben.
Kia ora.
Calling for a seconder.
Second.
Thank you,
Second.
Councillor Stratford. Darren, I'll hand the floor to you and to Ruben at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm in the hands of Ruben with this one, and Ruben's joining us from the US today. Got that right? So, Ruben, over to you. You're just on mute. Kia ora, Darren, thank you for that. And yes, I am joining us from a beautifully, wonderfully toasty 35 degrees Arizona heat here in the US. And as Darren noted previously, it is a joy to be able to continue to work and contribute to Far North District Council with our very forward-thinking remote activities. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have through you, Madam Chair. Before you is the results of our annual survey that has come back now in full conclusion, demonstrating the 2022 results. And I've got just a brief presentation that I can go into if needed, should you or the committee board members like for me to do so. But generally, it's a summary of what I have included in the report. And also attached to the agenda is the full report that drills down into detail as to the results of the study. I have also asked our representative from Key Research, Michael Hooker, who is from Key Research, and he is the, I believe, the regional manager for the third-party surveying company that we use to provide the study, in case there's any technical questions that he might be able to answer. So I leave it to you, Madam Chair, to if you're happy for me to go into a presentation, or for the sake of time, I'm happy to just receive the report as submitted.
Thank you, Ruben. How brief is your presentation?
Oh, I've narrowed it down to 10 slides, Madam Chair.
Committee members, what's your thoughts? Would you like to see the presentation or partai?
Madam Chair, I'm happy for the report and the attachment to be taken as read.
Kapai, thank you. Anybody opposed to that? No? Fantastic. Who wants to kick us off with questions for Ruben? Member Napier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 57 of our papers, there is the heading Next Steps. And I do have a question, and if I may just preface that question, Madam Chair, with an observation, that the next steps read to me more like observations rather than next steps that lead to correction or improvement. They don't read to me like the type of next steps that are actually action points, but they are more so inferences that are validly drawn, I think, from the survey results. So that's my preface to the question. My question is, at what level of council, in what way do we actually get to address the observations and wānanga on, or debate on, or contemplate on action points to correct what clearly is opportunities for correction and improvement?
Absolutely, happy to answer that. So the next steps, as included in this report, it's within the context of the report survey results that has been provided. So yes, you are correct. They're more generally speaking in observations from the data that we've seen come through. The report is to this committee to receive the report, and from this point forward, we take that back to our individualized departments and different areas of the organization to see how we can drill down to some of the feedback and some of the results that we are seeing, and how we can apply any change to any of the business practices across the organization. Certainly, there is a lot to digest here, as you can see, and for the sake of this report coming to this committee, there is no detailed reporting of that extent to each individualized department and where we can make that effect. But that's definitely the next steps forward in the plan for us to come back
go back to our individualized departments and see what we can do to affect change in these specific areas. I want to note that the council has made a decision here recently to move away from an annual survey to a quarterly survey. And this allows us to gain any observations to any specific change that we've put in place. And so within the next first quarter of reporting in this coming year, we will start seeing some of those feedbacks come through and then monitor it as we go throughout the year, as opposed to having to wait a year out for the next resident opinion survey. We'll be able to monitor that a little bit more closely as we implement any kind of change.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That did answer my question.
Kia ora, Member Napia. Do I have any further questions for Ruben at this point before we move into debate? No. Ruben, thank you for your mahi and putting your 10 slides together. I'm sorry that we can't give you the opportunity to put those in place. So at this point, we're going to move into debate. Apologies, I didn't note who moved and seconded. Do I have any speakers for or against this report, please? Councillor Stratford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ruben, I noted that there were a number, like about 5 sections of our finance team where, you know, dissatisfaction had gone up a lot. I think it was the way that people could make rates payments, the price that they're paying for water, and there were 3 more other things in particular. And I just wondered if, and that's a really crucial thing, you know, if we can't assist people to pay and, you know, let them feel that they're getting some bang for their buck, that then the problems will, you know, increase with payments of rates, and that's where we get all the money to pay for all our services. And so have you been able to have a conversation with our finance team on that? I think that you answered earlier that there hasn't been any engagement internally, but for our CE, who I hope is online, a couple months ago, I witnessed our rates collection team getting an award for the work that they do in collecting rates. So I'd love to know what's going on for the dissatisfaction level to be on a trend of rise. Yeah, that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Stratford. Do I have any further speakers? Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ruben. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but I just wanted to table this with the other elected members because this was a topic of conversation at our conference, and namely that our council collects rates on behalf of the regional council, and in terms of perception, people see that as the total rate. And when you look at how much the rates have gone up from the Northern Regional Council, people perceive that as a district council increase, although factually it's not. I personally would like to see district council not collecting on behalf of the regional council, and they collect their own rates, and they have that accountability individually for their rates being identified individually from their council. And not on the same invoice as our council. The other councils that I've spoken to, all of them do not collect the rates on behalf of the regional council, and that is one of the big reasons that they have stopped doing it. So I just wanted to raise that kaupapa and to the other elected members there signal that I think that's an approach our council should take going forward.
Kia ora, Councillor Foy. Great opportunity. Yeah.
To that comment, Madam Chair, may I make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies.
No, terrific observations there. And I think what we could do in the new year moving forward is, in the absence of any specific change on how we collect rates, we can certainly try to make the questioning a bit more clearer in the survey so that the survey respondents do have an understanding of the rates that are being collected and defer the difference between regional and local. If I can make another comment to the results, the biggest decreases in satisfactions were certainly and very well pointed out that they were in the areas of payment arrangements and also invoicing, making clear this probably these two areas saw the biggest decrease. And I also want to note, however, that those have been trending downward since COVID. So I think that there's some consideration to be made that perhaps the challenges that we faced at the beginning of 2020 and then the consecutive years following has been a significant challenge, not both for councils to manage and deal with, but also residents. And I think that might be coming through to some of the results. And we've kind of briefly provided that a bit of insight, which has impacted this particular area. Meanwhile, the biggest improvers that we saw were around services, continuity of water supply, water pressure, stormwater systems. Overall performance actually improved slightly as we come out seemingly of post-COVID scenario. So just wanted to make that comment.
Kia ora, Ruben. Member Ward.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Ruben, for this. It made a lot of interesting highlighting for me. Just wanting to note really that the bulk of the dissatisfaction came out of the Bay of Islands Whangaroa ward area, my ward area, and so I found it interesting to see what areas people were most dissatisfied about that reflected on the council's reputation. But probably really COVID related, I think, definitely, after what you have just pointed out. I mean, things like dissatisfied with providing access to the coast. And I think that really clearly points out that people were exploring their backyards, and we're finding more and more increases in complaints about encroachment issues and things like that. So the fact that people have been, using the reserves and the public facilities and things big time through this last 2 to 3 year period in particular has been identified. So just look forward to, from a board's perspective, to working with you and with council to see how we can move forward at improving some of that dissatisfaction that has risen in levels unusually, I think, through this particular analysis. So thank you.
You're just on mute, Ruben.
Absolutely, through you, Madam Chair, if I may comment on that. While there has been unsatisfaction, you are correct that other areas that have that drove satisfaction was at the service delivery level, and we did see some significant help in the overall satisfaction level because of parks and coastal access and car parks and some of the other areas. So you are absolutely right that we have been seeing folks getting out and about and starting to provide feedback on those different services.
Kia ora, Ruben. Member Napier.
Kia ora, Ruben. Thank you for the report, and thank you for the questions that you've answered and the further explanations. I've already made the point earlier, so I won't repeat that in terms of action points, except to say I would like for it, if it were so possible, for staff to be reporting back on the specific action points that the departments have identified to undertake, so that it doesn't become just an observation and a set of observations. And but I accept, and I think good practice for those observations to filter down to the relevant departments in the council, and for those managers and staff to determine appropriate action points. So if it were possible for those to be reported back to us, but perhaps in conjunction, Ruben, with whatever reporting frequency you might undertake in terms of now the more frequent quarterly, I think you said, surveys. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is just perhaps a suggestion around labels. I'm not suggesting that key research do anything different, but just an observation that in terms of the area of reputation, it says there on page 56, most residents are skeptics. You know, the definition of a skeptic is a person who's inclined to question or doubt accepted opinions or circumstances. And I don't know that any of us would agree that the perceptions that 77% of our residents and ratepayers have are an acceptable state of affairs. So I don't think that they're skeptics. And culturally, I wonder if it would be well for us to consider them not so much skeptics, but customers who actually have opinions and who have levels of service and so forth that they seek to find improvements on. So just those observations, and of course it's a report for information, so of course I'll be voting to accept the report. But finally, thank you, Ruben, for your work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Sam. And at this point, I'd actually like to take some technical advice just quickly, Ruben, before you respond. I had foreshadowed an amendment in the chat, but I'm just wanting some governance support advice as to whether or not that amendment is technically feasible. So if you could look at that while Ruben responds, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. In regards to the terminology used, these are standard terminologies that's typically used in this type of research, but I do have, I believe Michael is on the line with us as well, and I'm going to ask if he might be available to comment on that.
Kia ora, Ruben. Kia ora, team. Good point, Mr. Napier. Thank you for that. We conduct these surveys across about 23 councils across New Zealand. This is a framework that we have developed. What you see there is what we refer to as the reputation profile for residents across your district. And so from that point of view, we're looking to apply a label, to use that term, for those people who would not necessarily be supporters of the way in which the council was performing at the moment. So yeah, so point taken, and we can certainly look to address that going forward.
Thank you, Michael.
Kia ora, Michael, and welcome to our hui. Nice to see you. Sam, does that settle your mind?
Yes, it did. And Madam Chair, while you're waiting for technical advice and possibly out of order, can I just say that I support your amendment, your proposed amendment?
Kia ora, Sam. At this point, perhaps Marlima or Aisha, if you've got any technical advice on that amendment, that would be great, noting that this is an information report.
Madam Chair, we have no technical advice for you at this moment.
Ka pai, thank you. So on that note, I am putting an amendment to the table that there becomes an and that the Strategy and Policy Committee recommends that Council receive a report from the CEO demonstrating how the organisation will address these survey results. Can I get a seconder for that, please?
Seconded.
Kia ora, Sam. Thank you for that. So just to speak to my amendment, Michael, I don't think it was you that was with us the first time that I sat on this committee where we received these results about 2 years ago, but I asked the very same question that Member Napier has asked today. And at the time, the response that I was given was that we could take comfort that we were learning from the investment that we're making into this research and into these results. 2 years on, I'm not feeling comfortable about that, and we are investing $27,000 a year of ratepayer funds into this exercise, which I don't disagree with at all. But I think in the interest of being a learning organisation, we have an obligation to be doing more with this information than what we're currently doing. So what I'm seeking from this amendment is a report to give me comfort that we are learning from these results, that they are becoming embedded into the culture of continuous improvement of our organisation, and ensuring that we constantly check in and evolve to serve the communities that we sit here to serve. So that is my amendment today. I'm happy to put it to the table. Member Napier, I'll give you the floor as the seconder.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree entirely with the amendment, and including the reasons that you have just described. Madam Chair, I took comfort from learning some stuff just the other day. I stepped on the scales, and there were certain things that I observed that actually just observing won't give me any comfort. I've got to actually do some stuff. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm happy for the Chief Executive to, with his respective group managers, to champion whatever needs to be done. But like you, Madam Chair, I do wish for that to be reported back to this committee so that we can actually take comfort, not necessarily the false comfort that I took the other day when I stepped on the scale. So I will be very supportive of the amendment and voting for it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Member Napier. Deputy Mayor Court.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And stepping where angels fear to tread, I think that's a bit of a tough ask, to be fair. I think the responsibility for taking ownership of this paper resides with elected members, not with the CEO. It is the elected members who sit down and write the long-term plan. And it is the elected members that have the conversation with the community about levels of service and the rating impact. And it is the elected members that should take ownership of things such as image and reputation. So I'm not quite sure what you're expecting the Chief Executive to come back to you with a report on. But I do think that there would be merit in the incoming council having the opportunity to sit down with this report and with the Chief Executive and the senior leadership team and go through these. And I think it would be a day, maybe two, and sit down and go through these point by point by point and have the conversation around how we can change the direction of the ship. Bit controversial, but that's where my heart sits today. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor Court. Do I have any further speakers to the amendment at this stage? I note that our CE has turned his camera on. Kia ora, Blair, and your hand is up, so the floor's yours.
So hopefully I'm off mute. Take my hand down. Okay, I understand what is being asked here, but I would go back to the comment that Councillor Court made, or Deputy Mayor Councillor Court made, is the council set the LTP. When you read the verbal responses that people have made, it fundamentally is that council hasn't done the basics well. They see council as being a roadblock. That's a nice way of putting it. Now, it is council that adopts the district plan. Staff must implement that. It is council that adopts the dust ceiling matrix. Council staff must implement that. It is council that determine the level of rates and the whether or not we'll do an upgrade on a given plant or not. And the public see the results of that. It is council that set the footpath budget. So what we're seeing is effectively a community telling the council that it wants to see a lot of those basics done really well. Now, I can write you a report, but effectively all I'm going to do is echo those concerns and say, within the decision-making powers of council, you can either use that to assist in that budget setting process. It's a very challenging one to report back and say, operationally, we're going to do anything different, because operationally, we operate within the boundaries set by council. And what the public are telling you is that they're not happy with that. So that is a very key message for councillors to pick up on, that doing what we've continued to do for the last 5 years, 10 years, is not cutting it with the ratepayers, well, the group of ratepayers that were surveyed, sorry, because it is a small sample. So there's a very strong message that the councillors can pick up on, which is we are the new council, and that what are the priorities. It's an opportunity there to decide whether or not we're focusing the resources, which are limited, into those areas that are going to either gain higher scores or align better with government policies, because sometimes they're actually incompatible. Thank you.
Kia ora, Blair. Councillor Clendon.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that summary, Blair. And that's actually given, what you've just said, if that was put into a paper, that would be an excellent reason for having a response, because you've said some really interesting things there. And I think it's things that the council needs to have a conversation about. And that conversation won't be held if we simply accept this document and say, okay, things are not great, let's move on. So yes, if you would put those comments into a one-pager, and that's all it need be, then I think that would open the door for a very interesting conversation, and I think it's one the next council needs to have. So thank you for that. Through
your worship, or through Madam Chair, sorry, jumping the gun there, sorry. If the councillors were after that level of briefing, I'd be very comfortable with that amendment. If they're after it bullet point by bullet point going through each of those comments, I'm sorry, I would have some concern with that. Thank you.
Kia ora, Blair. I don't have any further hands, so I'll just take my right of reply and tautoko what Councillor Clendon has just raised. Referring back to the report that we requested earlier, it doesn't need to be hundreds of pages. It needs to give us comfort that you are looking to address this. I take on board Deputy Mayor Court's comments around levels of service. My concern is some of these are not around the levels of service that we've set, but around the contract performance, for example, which is a conversation that we've had numerous times around this table, and we don't currently measure. I see this exercise as a way that we should be measuring that. So I am happy to continue with this amendment today. Blair, I take on board your comments, but I look forward to the report being received by what I would imagine will be the incoming council, where they can then sit down, chew the fat and figure out how they're going to address that through the long-term plan. So we have an amendment on the table, and at this point I'm happy to put it to the vote. I am in favour. Councillor Clendon.
In favour.
Mayor Carter.
In favour.
Deputy Mayor Court.
In favour.
Councillor Collard.
In favour.
Councillor Foy.
In favour.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Councillor Vucic has left us. Member Napier.
In favour.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
And I support. I'm still here, Madam Chair.
Apologies, Member Ward.
So good.
Clearly, I need to put my glasses on at this point. My eyes are
it's well carried.
Kia ora. So that becomes part of the substantive motion. So we have a motion in front of us that the Strategy and Policy Committee receive the report Resident Opinion Survey 21-22, and that the Strategy and Policy Committees recommend that Council receive a report from the CEO demonstrating how the organisation will address these survey results. That has been moved and seconded. Do I have any further debate at this point? No, in that case, I'm happy to put it to the vote. I am in support. Councillor Clendon.
In support.
Mayor Carter.
In support.
Deputy Mayor Court.
In support.
Councillor Collard.
Support.
Councillor Foy.
Support.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Member Ward. Member Ward.
Support. Sorry, I haven't left the room.
No, kapai. Member Napier.
Aye.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
And that is carried. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to the last agenda item of the day, a nice easy one, 6.2, the Strategy and Policy Action Sheet update for July 2022. The recommendation in front of us is that, apologies, my iPad has gone slow, that we simply receive the report action sheet update for July 2022. Do I have a mover, please?
So, second, Kelly.
Sorry, who moved that one?
Raniera.
Raniera, Kapai, thank you. So that is moved and seconded. Do we have any questions or comments on this action sheet at this point? Raniera, I'll give you first dibs as the mover.
No specific kōrero from me, except to say that it seems to be a very long list of actions that need to be carried out and followed up with the complete adoration and acknowledgement to all the work that has been done by the council, by the committee therein, and of course the staff wherein, and look forward to supporting where I can going forward. Kia ora tātou.
Ka pai, thank you. Councillor Stratford.
I just wanted to raise that I have had some communication from members of the public on that. Is it the Parks and Reserves policy? Do you or Darren want to bring that up? Just to clarify again for any members of the public, how they're going to be, because it was oral consultation or something or other. Or maybe
Kia ora, Kelly. I'm happy to briefly touch on that, and then if I miss anything, Darren might want to fill in the gaps. So I think what you're referring to is the change in way that we conduct our consultation process for our bylaws now. So rather than having a formalised hearing as such, which we aren't required to do, in the interest of becoming more accessible, we have the option of providing a written submission or a verbal submission, which is what we'll be hearing this afternoon. And that's in an endeavour for our council to be more accessible and recognise that not everybody is comfortable with providing a written submission. My understanding is that for anybody who wants to back up their written submission with a verbal, still has that opportunity to do that as part of that process. But it's a change in the way that we've done things historically. Personally, I think that it's a change for the better, but change is always going to take a little bit of navigation. So just to summarise how does that land for you, Councillor Stratford?
It does. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Did I miss anything, Darren?
No, that sums it up really nicely. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ka pai, thank you. Do I have any further speakers or questions to this report? Member Ward.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just want to acknowledge a big thank you to staff, please, in relation to the alfresco dining policy issue, and B, to delegate authority to comment from the board perspective, just to let you know that we are now receiving all applications for alfresco dining, which is fabulous. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's excellent feedback. Thank you, Member Ward. Anybody further before I ask Darren to close us off with a karakia? No, ka pai. So we've got a resolution in front of us that the Strategy and Policy Committee received the report action sheet update for July 2022. I'm in support. Councillor Clendon.
In support.
Mayor Carter.
In support.
Deputy Mayor Court.
In support.
Councillor Collard.
Support.
Councillor Foy.
Aye.
Councillor Stratford.
Aye.
Member Ward.
Support.
Member Napier.
Aye.
Member Kyle.
Aye.
Fantastic, is carried. So that brings us to the end of our agenda, everybody. Before we close us off, I just want to acknowledge the hard mahi that we've done here today. I feel like this has been the most solid of committee meetings that we've had to date this term. It's been really robust, and I think that we've really owned some policy today, which is quite refreshing. It has taken us a while to get our feet under the table, especially with COVID and learning to operate in a virtual environment. But when I reflect on the words of the review panel for the review for future for local government and their recommendation that a term looks to extend to 4 or 5 years, I begin to understand why, because this is our second to last meeting and we've really finally got our feet solidly under the table as a committee. I want to acknowledge both Member Napier and Member Kyle for your excellent contributions today and for being here with us in what is, I know, a very unusual and outside the box environment. It's different to anything else that anybody can be involved in, I think. So thank you for working with our process and for bringing yourselves to our table. I look forward to having you at our next meeting and any workshops that we have between now and then. To all of our committee members and to staff, thank you for your mahi, for your patience and for your contributions today. Kia ora koutou, Darren, I'll ask you to close with a karakia.
Ka pai, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, this is a real privilege for me as a member of staff to be able to close us today with karakia. So thank you for providing me with the opportunity. Sam, Raniera, really nice to have you as part of our committee, and it's been a long time coming. So ngā mihi ngai. Kia tātou. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea ngaro. Kia rongo ki tēnei o tātou. Kia mahia, te hua mā kihi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori. Kia tūturu, kia whaka maua, kia tīna, hui e tāi.
Kia ora, Darren, thank you for that. And just a quick reminder to anybody who can make it, in 13 minutes, we're going to be hearing one verbal submission. We don't require a quorum, but I'd appreciate anybody who can be there to